The shocking truth that ended a great friendship forever. Our daughters went to preschool together, and we started socializing with playdates 2 or 3 times a week for about a year. The kids would play and we'd drink coffee and chat. When I had to take my husband for surgery, she offered to watch my kid. It was the very first time she'd ever watched her without me there. I came back a few hours later to find my 3-year-old sitting in a corner, looking as if she'd been crying. The ex-friend launched into this really detailed story about how my daughter had repeatedly tried to take a toy from her daughter, so she'd had to give her a timeout, and my daughter was upset at the discipline. Got my kid in the car and asked what had happened. She said that she and her friend had argued over a toy. Ex-friend had gotten right into her face and screamed at her, so close that she had sprayed my daughter's face with spittle. Then, to skip some of the graphic detail, my daughter ended up with a big lump on her head. So we turned around and drove straight to the police station. The police interviewed me and my daughter. I later found out they sent officers to interview the ex-friend, and on the strength of their observations, Child Protective Services were brought in. Her daughters were regularly subject to some pretty rough treatment. There were a lot of injuries and various stages of healing. Ex-friend got a suspended sentence and lost custody of her 2 children to her mother-in-law until she worked through an anger management and parenting program. I don't know if she ever completed it. Here's the worst part. I spent 2 or 3 hours a week with that woman for a year, and I had no clue about what she was doing. None. Nothing she said ever raised red flags. I never saw her threaten or discipline her kids in public. Her daughters were very quiet and well-behaved, maybe a little too eager to please adults, but nothing really remarkable. She never left marks in visible places. My friend said, "I'm sorry, but I have my own issues to worry about," after I told her my father had just died unexpectedly. I stopped him and another friend from taking advantage of someone who had passed out. Things ended up getting physical between me and them, and I walked out of their house after getting the girl back to a safe place. I haven't seen them since, and I hope I never do. When I found out he was messaging all of my friends privately, saying that if they stay friends with me, they'll F up in life because I'll take them down a bad path. I honestly don't know why he did or thought this, but I never spoke to him again after that. Well, if some of them told you about it, then they were clearly at least onto his games. I wonder what his internal reasoning was. Did he actually think you'd screwed him up, or was he trying to isolate you into some sort of codependence? Ugh. She accidentally emailed me when she meant to email someone else. In the email, she was talking crap about me. I deleted it, cried, and never talked to her again. I found out that a couple of friends of mine had a secret hobby they were keeping behind my back. They were basically pretending to be interested in depressed, insecure girls who were depressed and overweight with acne, so that these girls would send them undressed photos, and then the guys would turn around and embarrass and humiliate them. Screw that, that's just horribly cruel. It wasn't limited to just overweight, insecure girls, but that was their main target because it was more fun to pick on people with low self-esteem for them, I guess. One of my best friend's girlfriends that I'd known for 3 years, very good friend with both of them, had this crazy thought that I was in love with her and tried to steal her from him. He believed her, and so did a lot of my other very good friends. I told them that if that's what you think of me as a person after all these years, then get lost. This was during a party after we graduated. Screw her for manipulating my friends. I actually had my boyfriend's friend try and sleep with me. He wasn't in love with me, he was just in the mood, I guess. He was also engaged to a friend of mine and still is. When I told my significant other what happened, this friend started slandering me to all of our friends and told a completely different story. He exaggerated what had happened and placed all of the blame on me and tried to make himself look like a victim. 3 years of friendship was lost just because he couldn't keep his eggplant in his pants while his fiancée and my boyfriend were both working. My best friend in high school. Top guy, shirt off your back kind of fella. We experienced everything together, all the pre- and post-pubescent stuff, first mess around with illegal stuff, substances, drinks, you name it. At the time, both of us were heavily involved in trafficking green herb through our respective schools, and due to my size, I was a debt collector of sorts for kids who had stiffed the local dealers. Then, through an unfortunate series of events, I cleaned myself up and dropped anything that wasn't legal. Doug, though, he was just having too much fun doing his thing. We still caught up just as often, but this time I was just on the sauce. I wasn't shooting gear or smoking stuff. He'd always ask, and I'd always decline. This riled Doug up to the point where he cut off contact with me one day, really abruptly. Didn't feel the need to pursue a reason from him. So fast forward about 10 years. My mum rings me and tells me that Doug had rocked up at my folks' place, asking to catch up and bury the hatchet as he was clean. so she gave him my address and he was coming over. My missus didn't know about Doug and was fast asleep anyway, so I just left the door open a crack so I could hear his car pull up. I had a really bad feeling about it though, to the point where I grabbed the pacifier, a length of thick red gum that I'd fashioned into a cudgel from my high school woodwork days. It usually lived near the door, and I slid it hidden from sight near the couch I was sitting on. I still don't know why. Moments later, I hear a car pull up. I go outside to meet him and could immediately tell something was up. Firstly, Doug was frickin' flying. Pupils like 5-cent pieces. So much for being clean. Second, instead of his crappy Holden that we used to bomb around Broady in, he was driving some old Volvo. Now, I know his family was the same as mine, pretty much bogan, which means on welfare for you other folks, and they were die-hard Holden lovers, so it struck me as odd. We used to nick a few cars for insurance jobs back in the day too. Damn, haven't thought about that in years. Anyway, after an awkward handshake, I motioned him around the back to the shed, basically my man cave. Hit the lights, grab a beer, and I toss one to him. Frick me, he had a rough time. He was thin as a whip now, couple of dodgy neck and facial tattoos. He was pretty fidgety, I guess from the gear he was obviously on. He was rambling about his stint inside, not surprising, and how his family had all moved back up north and how he was clean now. I stopped him there and called him out. Basically, I said, bull. I can't remember exactly what I said. He insisted it was from cold medicine or something. Sure. The whole time he was looking around the shed, but only at certain things. Expensive things. Power tools, gym kit, and my weapon safe in particular. I didn't like where this was going, so I told him we can catch up later on in the week or something. I've got to go to bed. He was cool with that, smiled and patted me on the back and jumped back in his car after I walked him out. I stuck my head out to say see you, checked the ignition, and of course, there's no key. Couple of days later, I note the safe had pry marks on the paint. Now this motherfricker is locked up good, solid steel, anchored to the concrete. It isn't opening unless I open it. Australian law is pretty hardcore with that stuff. I call up the cops and I tell them what's happened. They come around and have a squiz. I let them know I'm pretty sure I know who tried to open it. I give him Doug's full name and I leave it at that. I haven't heard from the bloke in 15 years now. Frankly, I don't care if I do. John has enlightened me to the white man's plight and to the threat of the Jew. I cannot abide my brother bedding one without intervening. If you continue to see that woman, I will end both of you. That was probably the darkest part of my life. The statement came from my best friend of 11 years, a surrogate brother and integral part of my childhood. He had threatened to kill me and an innocent woman because of her religion. There were no classic warning signs, no slippery slope, at least that I saw. He just started hanging out with some punk kid, and a few weeks later his head was shaved and he was a big fan of eugenics. I haven't talked to him since. Chris, if you're listening, I'm sorry I wasn't a strong enough friend to get you out of there. I'm sorry I couldn't keep you from whatever made you so hateful. I hope you've come past your anger and I hope you're happy. I still think of you, often. You're the reason I survived as long as I have. Yep. I hate that despite all of our wealth of information and historical examples, people seemingly continue to fall down this rabbit hole. In many ways, the internet has cooked us. Then again, this particular story seemingly happened without that gateway to misleading information. Us humans really do just keep falling into the same traps, don't we? After several failed attempts to cheer her up or comfort her during a mental breakdown, I asked her what I could possibly do to help her, and she essentially told me to figure it out. It was a long-distance friendship, and up to that point, she had been showing more noticeable signs of mental instability, and it was becoming a burden to talk to her because I became a scapegoat for her problems. I couldn't deal with it anymore, so I stopped talking to her. About 4 years later, she sent me a message saying she couldn't remember why we stopped talking, but that she was sorry for whatever happened. After going through some of her social media, she seems a lot happier and healthier, so I welcomed her back into my life. We don't talk often, but I'm happy this story has a happier ending than some of these. My best friend from elementary school moved away in the 5th grade. I had a terrible time adjusting, but I was eager to hear from him again. Over the course of our respective school careers, he had come down almost every summer and would hang out at each other's places of residence. He was staying with a cousin while he was in my neck of the woods. Eventually, our reunions stopped one year while I was living away from home, but I grew expectant for the next time. We'd been friends for so long, why couldn't we wait a bit longer? When he showed up the next summer, everything had changed between us. We'd grown into two completely different people that couldn't connect. Our last physical conversation detailed our plans for dinner. Our last text conversation went like this. "Oh hey, did you call me?" "No." "Okay, cool, just checking." Growing apart is a scary thing, but it happens. I'm a pretty laid-back and easygoing guy. I'll do favors for friends and go out of my way to help. I had one friend who'd take advantage of those traits. I'll let it go for a while, but if the taking never stops and favors are never returned, I'll walk away without ever looking back. The last straw for me was when a friend asked if I wanted to come over after the birthday party we had for a friend. He said he'd drive and I could leave my car there and get it in the morning, as it was right on the way to work. So I said sure and went with him. On the way home, he stopped to fill up and demanded gas money since he drove. He didn't ask, he demanded that I pay half. I just got out, closed the door, and walked away. I had a friend like that too. Always asking for rides, always promising gas money, and always forgetting his wallet. One day he told me I was invited to a party some of his friends were having at a place 2 hours away from where he lived, and then once we got there he told me I'd never been invited in the first place and wasn't welcome, but I could come back later and give him a ride home. I just left and I haven't talked to him since. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius? I was living as a roommate in my friend's apartment. First, he wanted to make a deal with me. His idea was that I should apply for a place in an elite student dormitory because I had a decent chance to get in, but then that I shouldn't move in, I should remain in his apartment as a tenant and pay him rent? And he'd use my room in the dormitory as an office for his startup company. He'd give me a 6-pack of beer for this. I told him that first, operating a company in a student dormitory will surely attract some unwanted attention, especially because 3 students were living in each, and the other 2 students would be a bit upset when a company started working in their room. Second, it would be business of the century to have a free room where I don't live and rent another room from him just for shifts and giggles. I asked him if he thought that from then on I'd live in his flat for free. He reassured me that he thought that we were such good friends that I'd pay him rent continuously, but give him my dormitory room for free to use. After I said to go F himself, his next idea was to evict me from his flat, but didn't tell me in advance because he was afraid that I'd beat him up. We were friends for 10 years at that point, and I never hurt or threatened him in any way during that decade. After this, I told him to go F himself, and I haven't spoken to him in a decade. I stopped taking pills with him. If substances are a significant part of the friendship, it's a good idea to perform friendship sobriety tests every once in a while. It really puts things in perspective. My best friend of 2 years began making racist comments to me about myself and my family out of the blue and refused to acknowledge that she had done anything wrong. From that incident, I finally learned how to stand up for myself, and I'm no longer treated like a doormat, so every cloud has a silver lining, I guess. I actually stopped speaking to someone after I found out how she had wronged one of my other close friends. It was in high school, and it seemed strange and petty, but the friend I stopped speaking to was telling a lot of people that my good friend was cheating on her boyfriend. She even went so far as to tell the boyfriend's mother. It was just so random and odd. If a friend can screw someone over, they can do it to you too. He tried to get my mom to send him undressed photos. I think I met this guy online while playing Xbox, PlayStation, WoW, and most other games. Damn, he must get around. That's a bold move for sure, and while if your mum was single and he was over a certain age, they can really do whatever they want, I do understand it being a friendship breaker. When they laugh at your pain and suffering when you're serious. I witnessed a gambling addiction swallow my friend's life up whole. The kid started innocently enough at 17. Got a fake license and went to one of those casinos that couldn't really give an F what age you actually were as long as you don't win. He lost every penny he had to his name up until that point. Had his fake ID taken from him that night too when he got pulled over on his way home. He then swiped his brother's debit card one day and ran him dry on an online casino. His parents banned his IP from the internet to prevent this in the future. So in turn, he goes out, tells me he needs $100 for an emergency and goes out and buys a crappy laptop with it. He then swipes his mum's credit card and runs a 4K tab on that again on an online casino. Fast forward about a year now. I got over the whole laptop thing since I was working and didn't really care too much about $100. He tells me and a bunch of other people he's doing a fake ID order. We were all about to go to college, so it made sense to get in on that. We gave him the money, take the photos, everything seems smooth. Wrong. The kid takes the money, it's about $1.5 grand of his friend's money, and buys himself a fake ID, then goes to that same casino and loses it all. After this, I basically told him to go F himself, but got begged by both mine and his parents to stay in touch because he needs support now more than ever. That same summer before college, the kid decided he wanted to make another casino run. He asks me to chill one day. Long story short, the kid had the stones to ask me if I wanted to rob a house with him. I got in a fight with him, and from what I understand, he actually still went ahead with it, and didn't get caught either. The worst part about it is, from what I understand, he robbed his grandparents since he knew where they kept their valuables. I don't talk to this kid anymore, but from what I understand, he later took his tuition money for college or something along those lines and basically gambled all of it. All I know now is that he's basically a college dropout and works at Burger King. The part that keeps me up at night is that part of me thinks I could have done more. Like, I could have just taken his keys so he couldn't go to the casino. Or I could have told his parents, who are extremely good people, when and where he was heading when I knew he was going to rob someone. I don't even know what to think of the guy anymore because he truly was a great friend at first, but something just clicked one day and the kid just couldn't stop gambling. I really thought he had hope when he went to college, as his first 2 years he did really well there, but his junior year, the last year, something went awfully wrong and it all fell apart. I've changed some of the info here because I didn't have the heart to completely put someone's life out there for frickin' karma, but I hope someone else out there reads this and maybe it helps them keep someone you thought would be your best friend forever when you were a kid. Repeatedly told me to shut up when around other people. When I made an issue over it, he accused me of being a little B-word and reminded people that one of my parents helps me to pay rent, even though this guy lives at home. This happened a few years ago. A close friend of mine said he couldn't trust me anymore and we couldn't be friends anymore just because I didn't talk to him for 5 days. He didn't let me explain that in reality, in those 5 days, I was recovering from an attempt to not be alive anymore. In 1997, when I was 12, I got into using chat rooms online with other people from across the world. I'm in Australia, and back then I thought this was the coolest thing ever. In 1999, while on IRC, I started to speak to a guy called Chris. He was a year older than me. He lived in the Los Angeles area and he was so cool at the time. He was in band, had piercings, was a rocker, skateboarded, and we'd talk for hours every day. I'd get home from school to tell him about my day, and it'd be the evening for him too, but the day before. Heck, I'd even say that he shaped my teen years, as he inspired my music taste in TV shows, and gave me a lot of advice. I wouldn't say we dated, but I'd have considered him my best friend. Sometime in 2000, he told me that he'd be coming over on vacation to Australia in January 2001. And as you could have imagined, I was over the moon. My city is a popular tourist destination a few hours away from Sydney, where he was staying for a couple of weeks. So after many months, we planned what we'd do, where we'd go, and everything. The time came, we didn't speak much over the course of a few days, with him being on vacation and all that, but we planned the day that we'd meet, and how I was to be picked up by the car his parents had rented for their vacation. The day was here, and I was so excited. I got ready in the morning and waited for the day to be picked up by him and his parents. Day turned into night, but I stayed there, hoping that he had simply been delayed. The following day, I waited again. I sent email after email to him, MSN message after message, but he didn't respond to me. Chris never came. The following morning after that, I called the home number he gave me a while ago and I'd written down, I never called him because that's when the call costs overseas were sky high, to try and see if there was anyone at his house who could give me any info on their whereabouts because I was worried. He answered the phone. After me going crazy on him, me crying, him beating around the bush, what I basically found out was that I'd been had. It all seemed to be some sort of sick joke, and he'd never even left the US. The vacation, the plans we made, it was all a lie. I never knew why he did it either, and to this day I still don't. But after that point I decided that maybe we shouldn't talk anymore. But 14 years down the line, I do still wonder what he's up to, or if he'll ever read this. In short, I was severely trolled by an American who wanted to meet up with me, but happened to be 8,000 miles from me instead. My gosh, the other side of that catfishing video I did a few weeks ago. I believe the video was, what is life like as a guy who pretends to be a female online? And even while doing that video, that had several stories of people who did this, not many of them ever really explicitly stated what they got out of it all. This is a good reminder of the cost to the victims, though. I thought that I loved her. We'd been friends with benefits for 2 years, she initiated the kissing and I'd taken her home. As she got out of the car that I drove her 40 miles just to get home in, I ran out to give her a goodbye hug, which she graciously accepted. Then she proceeded to tell our mutual best friend that I came at her and she was genuinely scared and she didn't know if she should press charges or not. Quote, I thought he was going to R-word me. End quote. I wish that was the actual end of it, but there was one more time that she called. A couple of weeks later, she told me that she was stranded far away from her apartment and that she needed some help. While I was furious that she'd done this to me, I decided to help. My friends and I picked her up. I didn't talk to her at all, and then my real best friend suggested, hey, why don't we get something to eat first? Because he didn't know what had happened between this chick and I. Everyone loved this idea except me. We went to a restaurant and I literally pretended to have an important phone call and walked around the neighborhood, too sick to my stomach to be near the table, until my best friend called me and said we should get going. We dropped the chick off, but before we did, she said, "Hey, I just want to be honest with you." And then she told me that the reason she was stranded was because she went to a person's house to do the deed with them, and she needed a ride home. I told the driving friend, "Let's get out of here." I never spoke to her again, even though she tried to text and Facebook me many times. He pasted a huge rant on my Facebook wall about how Obama was the Antichrist and how he couldn't wait for someone to end him, and if they didn't do it soon, he would. I blocked him on everything. Nobody needs that level of crazy in their life. What war crimes do the good guys in media commit against the so-called bad guys? In Stargate Atlantis, the goodies capture a wraith and perform medical experiments on him. A recent example I can think of is in Without Remorse, where you're supposed to believe that Michael B. Jordan is making a heroic one-man stand during a Black Ops mission in Russia, until you realize the Russian police and soldiers are responding to what appears to be a terror incident rather than the movie's villain blowing himself up, and have no clue who's shooting at them. Is it really Tom Clancy IP without a few war crimes sprinkled in under the guise of heroism? Oddly enough, in Red Storm Rising, he has an American airman get captured and treated well by his Soviet interrogator, and he ends up talking quite a bit. Shows how well that technique works compared to torture. You remember the time the Powerpuff Girls beat up Mojo Jojo while he was in jail doing absolutely nothing wrong? The girls should be tried for what they've done to Mojo, seriously. There's an episode in some of the more recent Powerpuff Girls where Bubbles gets a bad haircut and I think something happens to her face, so she feels ugly and decides she wants to be evil. She goes to Mojo Jojo's lair and asks to team up, and he's like, "No, I'm literally relaxing. I don't want to do evil stuff with you right now, Bubbles." But she keeps insisting, so he's like, "Fine, okay, whatever." And then Blossom and Buttercup come and mess up Mojo Jojo, and Bubbles switches back to their side. Then they blame the situation on Mojo Jojo and call him ugly. It was so screwed. Star Wars: The Clone Wars. Everything. When I remembered that General Grievous staged an attack on a medical facility, I began to wonder if the writers had a checklist of all the Geneva Convention rulings they could fit into the show. The Republic commits war atrocities all the time, and so do the rebels. Star Wars is full of war crimes on all sides. In the Star Trek Discovery pilot, they booby-trap dead bodies, which is a war crime. Yes, maybe in the future the Geneva Convention has been updated, they actually name-check that it still exists in Episode 3 of Season 1, but you'd expect it to change for the better, not give the okay for the same tactics extremists use today. They also try to murderize a whole planet, but compromise to overthrowing the legitimate ruling government. In Star Trek Enterprise, Archer threw a guy into an airlock and decompressed it until the guy talked. James Bond commits multiple acts of torture and frequently threatens unarmed people with assault or even death. This is played almost as satire in the later movies, where he's portrayed unambiguously as a complete sociopath. In a sense, that's getting back to the source material. The original Bond in Ian Fleming's works was portrayed as being cold and ruthless, and quite possibly a sociopath of sorts. Yes, the narrator actually enjoys that the Craig films do portray Bond as someone who should not at all be emulated rather than a cool role model. Too bad that so many people failed to see that. People are dumb. Isn't Ender's Game about tricking a child into committing xenocide? Yeah, but the terrible psychological effect that it has on Ender is the whole point of the book, something the movie sadly neglected. The end of the movie takes place 2/3 of the way into the book. A huge plot arc of that series is Ender trying to figure out how to deal with his own internal grief at what he's done, while simultaneously being praised as a hero. Well, the second book is all about trying to make things right by finding a new planet for the Queen. Star Wars. The Republic is literally creating human beings with short lifespans, puts control chips in their brains, and indoctrinates them to feed them into the meat grinder. That is 40k levels of dark. Also, everyone has way more than necessary sapient droids that get treated like slaves at best. The basic battle droids could probably beat the Turing test, and even the Jedi kill them basically for fun. The droids' right issues are hilariously unexplored. Every droid you see blasted is at least semi-sentient and held in slavery. They're clearly able to feel emotions and pain. Torture is typically a default. The protagonist doesn't have time to play by the rules, so he tortures info out of the person. Hollywood loves to show that torture is the only way to get info out of someone when it's actually not only a war crime, but the least reliable method. Only Captain America used the steak and potatoes method. In the last Hunger Games movie, didn't the good guys drop medical supplies only just for half of them to be bombs to make the bad guys look bad? Yeah, they committed a really nasty false flag attack against children. To be fair, it's a major plot point that turns Katniss against them. She even shoots the head of District 13 afterwards. Also, her sister was not old enough to be a volunteer army medic according to District 13, who was so militant about rules. Coin was a control freak, so she would have had to specifically made the decision to send Prim and also been aware of the tactics they were going to use. Inglorious bastards. I'm pretty sure you're not allowed to scalp people. This is a good answer because they actually are in a war, and a lot of answers here are just regular crimes. The protagonists in that film scalp dead and dying soldiers, they execute prisoners of war, and disfigure survivors. Even Landa has a line near the end, during the make a deal scene, something like, "As of right now, your plan, which some would call a terror plot, is still a go." I mean, he's got a point. The plan is to essentially assassinate the German high command by bombing a theater full of citizens. Fake surrendering and harming someone after they've surrendered. Every other damn action movie. I remember when I first played Skyrim, this guy said, I yield, and stopped attacking. I held back, thinking this was some sort of nifty game mechanic, and then he went right back to trying to kill me. I was annoyed. A lot of good guys flirt with or outright commit torture in interrogation sessions. Remember, it's considered bad to physically attack someone when they can't fight back, no matter what the circumstances, and in the real world it usually doesn't work. Torture makes people say whatever the torturer wants them to say, not what they actually need to hear. People who don't know anything will come up with the most elaborate stories to make it stop. Not to mention guerrilla forces are quite selective with information to prevent spies and defectors from gleaning anything useful. Heck, I wonder if a guerrilla commander ever deliberately gave a fighter false info to let him be captured and have the false information tortured out of him so the opposing forces would walk right into an ambush. In Community, Pierce Hawthorne fakes a heart attack to shoot one of City College's stormtroopers, then disguises himself in the guy's armor and shoots the remaining stormtroopers to win a paintball tournament for Greendale. Whenever somebody fakes a surrender, it's disturbing how many people writing back to me don't know that you can't fake a surrender. Obi-Wan Kenobi is a master of the fake surrender. I just got past Kong Prell in the Clone Wars, and Obi-Wan did the fake surrender at least 3 times by then. That's Season 4. There are so many war crimes in the Clone Wars, and those are just the ones shown. That scene in Saving Private Ryan where they shoot the unarmed Czech conscripts. That was literally against the rules of engagement, and a damn tragedy. Could have happened in real life too. Imagine being forced to fight for Germany, and just when you think it's over, you get killed by your perceived saviors. Perfidy, which is a fancy word for surrendering only to whip around and start killing your captor. It's seen a lot in Star Wars: The Clone Wars. Inglorious bastards. Beating surrendered combatants with a baseball bat is not great, to be honest. I love the scene in which the Germans watch a propaganda film in Shoshana's theater, and they're all cheering and clapping like idiots at the obviously romanticized Third Reich hero mowing down ally soldier after ally soldier, when you realize you, as a viewer, have been doing essentially the same thing. Anakin Skywalker in the Clone Wars is notorious for falsely surrendering to the Separatists. He did this in Season 7, Episode 9 to lure the tactical droid out of hiding on a battlefront before the Siege of Mandalore. Given a lot of his conduct, we can grant Anakin the right of master when it comes to war crimes. False surrender, ridiculously common in Star Wars, World War II films, and middle schools. This regards cop movies more, but I've recently been rewatching some absolute bangers from the 80s, including Lethal Weapon, Tango and Cash Action, Jackson, and it's hilarious how insane and borderline sadistic the cops are. Have you ever considered what a psycho John McClane is to kill some guy, put a Christmas elf hat on him and write, "Now I have weapon we can't say on YouTube, ho ho ho," on his shirt in Die Hard? It's such a funny 80s trope that cops were supposed to be these rule-breaking fanatics. Don't forget Die Hard 5 when he causes an accident, sucker punches a guy and steals a car. I am dying over here at the fact that half this group is just Star Wars-based stuff. Yeah, honestly, the narrator hasn't even seen most of the Clone Wars, but even from the original films, he can remember a few moments where the goodies go from being surrendered to pulling a bunch of weapons and killing the enemy while they're surprised. Every scene with a flamethrower. Even the 2017 My Little Pony film is guilty of this. I was actually going to blame you for false information, but I just did a quick search that it was in fact banned in 1919, but I thought it was 1978 because that was when the US stopped using them. The very existence of flamethrowers proves that sometime, somewhere, someone said to themselves, "I want to set those people over there on fire, but I'm just not close enough to get the job done," said by George Carlin in 1984. Where they dress up as soldiers of the evil empire and proceed to kill enemy soldiers who think that they're on their side. Looking at you, Star Wars. Although, to be fair, if the enemy I was facing had a planet-destroying laser, that would be a crime I'd happily commit. Every time they kill a minion. Nobody cares about the ninja army getting slaughtered, but the moment the big bad steps in the room, suddenly everyone has a conscience. Or they're storming the evil fortress, or business, or mansion, and some former veteran is just working security there to try and feed his family. He has no clue the boss is some supervillain bent on world domination or has kidnapped the protagonist's kid. Crap, the authorities don't even know. So from his perspective, there's just some armed psycho taking out his co-workers and friends, so he's doing his job, and now he's dead or permanently disabled because the hero has to be a hero and not say anything about his family or the evil plot and not make any attempts to spare lives. Superheroes who destroy half the town before the villain even does anything. There was actually a Superman comic where he heard the news about a hurricane that destroyed houses because they weren't built to the standard, and that the government was going to build new houses for the displaced residents and ensure the new ones were up to code. So he flies off to a nearby poor district in town, told the residents to get out, and proceeded to destroy the entire district to ensure the government would build them new, better houses. Yes, that was an actual comic. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I don't care if they've got magical superpowers, a lot of the good guys are using child soldiers. Spider-Man's 15 in Homecoming. Attack on Titan has them all training at the same age, and they're fighting monsters well before they're 18. I think in Spider-Man's case, Tony realized, and that's why he sent Peter home. In Attack on Titan, it's literally life or death. In XCOM and XCOM 2, you commit some serious atrocities. Collateral damage in spades inside of cities, grenades and rockets going astray and killing civilians, acid, poison, and incendiaries are all utilized because screw the aliens pain, and the Reaper faction literally eats aliens. Plus you can go some dark directions in the lore if you want. This is all excused as, aliens never signed the Geneva Convention, so it's fine. Then you learn most of the aliens are basically either part human or forced into doing what they did. Yeah, that felt really blatant. Especially with the, "we'd never modify our soldiers like those insurgent people do, that's grotesque." You then go on to upgrade your soldiers with 6 times more upgrades than the enemy have, and basically take a soldier's head and put them onto a robot body. They kill all the bad guys, as in the soldiers and mercenaries and other goons working for the bad guy, but they can't kill the bad guy because he needs to be brought to justice. Oh, that's not a war crime, it's just kind of stupid, and it's a dumb trope of storytelling. Mostly anything the bad faction does that makes our blood boil. It's somehow okay for the heroes to torture them, kidnap their relatives and stuff, it's only wrong when the bad guys do it. The human brain is funny. There's an individual, let's call him A. Skywalker. No, that's too obvious. Let's call him Anakin S. His list is a little intense. Let's see if I can get everything. There's false surrendering, executing a surrendering foe, acting outside the rules of engagement, massacring an entire village including women and children, killing fleeing foes, fighting as a child soldier, using child soldiers, treason, and torture. Oh, don't forget he killed child soldiers too. They were just on his side. The guy from Taken does torture. Impersonating an enemy soldier. It's only a breach when you do it for the espionage or an offensive mission. It's not a war crime to impersonate an enemy or non-combatant, like Red Cross, UN, or Chaplain, to evade capture or escape as a prisoner of war. Frank Castle, aka the Punisher. Due process of law, civil right violations, kidnapping, torture, and murder. But they deserve every bit of it, and we've loved Frank while he was committing these obvious crimes. He's more of an anti-hero though. Even he himself doesn't say what he's doing is right, only necessary. There's an issue where he sees some cops putting Punisher stickers on their cars, and he tells them to knock it off because he's not the good guy. He tells them to emulate Captain America instead. I hate it when the main character hates killing, but then kills swaths of cronies working for the big bad, gets to said big bad, and refuses to kill them. I just killed 50 people, mostly security, but some were scientists, some could have been secretaries, IT people, whatever. But I can't kill you, because then I'll be just as bad as you. Generally in the film followed by, "Hey, he shot me, bang. Now I'm justified in killing him." There's a great post somewhere pointing out all the times Avatar Aang kills someone, only for him to have a crisis of conscience before fighting the planet-wide dictator who burned off his son's face for not wanting to sacrifice troops. The rebels killed a crap ton of people when they blew up the Death Stars. So many independent contractors who just took a guaranteed government gig. While the first one was complete, the second took an active role in an ongoing battle. There's no crimes here, they were active and hostile. If anything, the Empire committed a crime by getting into the battle with those contractors on board. Obviously not a movie, but I'd like to bring up Halo. Spartans are biologically and psychologically enhanced child soldiers that were made to squash rebellions. It's only by chance that they were invaded by the Covenant and began fighting them instead. And for those who aren't aware, basically they were kidnapped as children and replaced by clones that would die soon after due to complications that came up with the cloning process, as was the plan. The Halo universe at least recognizes how evil and messed up the Spartan program was. Typically, whenever a soldier or a civilian finds out the truth, they're disgusted by the entire program. To cover up their part, Oni blames everything on Halsey and she just takes the blame. But the lore doesn't hide the fact that Oni are the real boogeymen, and that they'd gladly do it again if they could maintain their version of order. Yeah, it's a weird bit of side lore that comes up all the way through the last few games, but never actually affects what you're doing. You're essentially on the side of the evil empire all through those games. It's just that you're temporarily fighting an evil theocracy and on a break from massacring small-time rebels. The best movies are the ones where you can understand the antagonist's side and the protagonist isn't perfect. The Jackie Chan movie The Foreigner did this right by displaying many different kinds of terror acts, but ends wrong because Jackie doesn't get his comeuppance. He did a whole bunch of bad stuff and got away for free because he had a sad story, I guess? Trying to stop the bad guy and destroying the entire city in the process. The premise of Captain America Civil War. In Red Dead 2, you can fake surrender to lawmen. The bloodiest shootout I had, I was trying to surrender. I don't know what happened. I gently bumped a guy with my horse by accident and a lawman saw me, so I got off and put my hands up like, "Sorry, I'll pay the fine or whatever." I never actually surrendered before, so I didn't know what I was doing. I was just standing there with my hands up, and the two cops kept saying, "Put your hands up," and then they just started blasting. It was a gosh darn bloodbath in the middle of the town. The bounty on me was ludicrous by the time I got out of there. Everything Jack Bauer did. That whole series is just a middle finger to the Geneva Convention. Battlefield, Call of Duty, or any other military game. Wanton destruction, buildings, infrastructure that isn't a direct target, using grenade launchers at close range, giving no quarter or aid to injured combatants, shooting humans directly with a 50 cal and larger weapons, flamethrowers, anything with a tripwire like claymores. Those are usually manually triggered, by the way. Video games and movies always get that wrong. Also, Taken, the first movie. Torture, murder, giving no quarter. This is really common in any media though. The good guys always executing injured enemies. Dressing as the enemy. Most movies. Try playing Spec Ops: The Line if you want a game that's kind of self-aware about it. Oh boy. Also, it probably doesn't count as a war crime, but it definitely wouldn't be allowed. Captain America wearing a flag as a uniform. Flag code says the flag should not be used as bedding, drapery, or worn as clothing, especially uniforms. Killing or finishing off injured enemies. That's kind of a grey area. If they're wounded in the middle of an active combat zone and still have weapons or equipment in hand, then you're probably good. Or if you're assaulting through an area, you can just put rounds into anything that would be a threat. If the fighting is done though, then yeah, you can't just shoot prisoners or the wounded. In Ace Combat Zero, you get points for destroying refugee tents. I'm looking at a lot of these other answers, and the one I haven't seen come up yet is mock execution. It's a hugely popular plot device to point a weapon at someone's head and pull the trigger when the chamber was empty, or to push someone off a roof onto a waiting platform or pad or whatever. But convincing someone that they or someone else is going to be killed imminently is a form of torture and thus a crime. Now that you know this, you'll see it everywhere. They're literally called the Dirty Dozen, and the way they dispose of those Third Reich people and their women, by pouring gasoline and grenades onto a bomb shelter, lived up to their name. But war crimes are usually only charged against the losers. It reminds me of what Defense Secretary Robert McNamara said of firebombing civilians in Tokyo in the documentary Fog of War, that they'd realized that if they'd lost the war, the bombing tactics they used would have definitely had them arrested for crimes. The Avengers and S.H.I.E.L.D. violate pretty much everyone's constitutional rights in a majority of the movies. The good in the Good, Bad, and the Ugly movie kills the most people over its runtime. Aragorn beheading the mouth of Sauron in the extended edition of The Return of the King. This is the King of Gondor beheading an unarmed messenger, something Tolkien specifically condemns as vile orc behavior earlier in the novel, and is then brought up again in the Mouth of Sauron chapter, when the Mouth of Sauron claims unassailability and Gandalf rejects it, saying, "The rules of war don't apply in Mordor," but then clarifies that obviously the men of Gondor are better than to murder an ambassador. And then Peter Jackson is like, "Hyuk!" Austin Powers crushed a guy with a steamroller, although that was more of an industrial accident than anything else. Brick killed a guy with a trident. Batman severely beats his victims, breaks bones, causes severe harm with gadgets, regardless of who he's fighting. Sure, the Joker deserves to lose teeth, but what about the random dealer? Does a desperate poor person selling substances to make ends meet in a brutal craphole city like Gotham deserve to be hospitalized? This is a huge theme of the Animorphs series. The main characters contemplate and even go through with mass murder on several occasions, as well as being literal child soldiers, and this isn't even going into the Andalites, who, while supposedly being on the good team, admit to using a virus to wipe out an entire planet to stop the villains from getting its resources. Have you seen Fury? Where do I frickin' begin? Killing prisoners? Looting? Attempted unspeakable act? Still one of the best movies I've seen. Also Band of Brothers. Spears is known for killing unarmed POWs. Jon Snow uses child soldiers against the White Walkers. Definitely not cool. I think in times of extreme urgency, using child soldiers isn't really a war crime. Like, just about everyone's gonna fight if not doing so means your death. It's why so many Soviets fought the Germans so viciously in World War II. It always bothered me that the British sieging a building full of Americans in the Patriot and burning it down with them inside was tremendously bad, but one would applaud William Wallace doing the same to a building full of British in Braveheart. My God, the top 20 answers are all either Saving Private Ryan or Star Wars The Clone Wars. What happened that made you go from stable relationship to, oh, I need a restraining order? We were actually engaged to be married. Then she went on holidays without me and came back pregnant. She then told me, "You've never done anything to prove you really love me. Accept this baby and help me raise it to prove it." I declined and asked her to leave the home that I paid for and that was in my name. She refused, so I made arrangements, cancelled my lease, then left and told her there were 4 days left on the lease, I think. She wailed, "But what am I supposed to do? I don't have a job." After the constant mental beatdown from her, I started suffering from ED at 22 years of age. Eventually, I mustered the courage to leave her. She quickly moved on to someone else who had later become her husband, and called me every week to basically rub it in, saying how much better he was than me, how much bigger he was than me, all that stuff. So I moved out of state, changed my number, never heard from her again. She called my parents and even showed up at their home, but they told her to go away. About 10 years later, my friend ran into an old friend of hers. Apparently, she had been arrested for attacking her own mother, got out of jail, attacked her husband, tried to take her kids from him, was arrested again, and later released. I guess I dodged a huge bullet there. Mine cheated on me the day my dad died. He sliced himself in front of me and then threatened to kill my cat. I was young, dumb, and thought that I was in love and ignored many red flags. As he got more comfortable around me, he let his crazy out. Someone stole his cell phone and he asked me to purchase a shotty for him so that he could go and shoot the person who did it. It took me another year and a half to leave. I did try breaking up with him, but he told me that if I ever left, he'd kill everyone I love and then self-delete so I'd know what it was like to be truly alone. That relationship ended up with an order of police protection. He was nuts. We met online, we both had video games in common, and we hit it right off. Fast forward 2 years and we got engaged. All was well, until he started getting violent toward me and our pets. I felt stuck because I couldn't afford to live on my own. Then he went on a business trip and I found a bunch of truly reprehensible adult films containing illegal subject matter hidden on a flash drive. Turned it in, he got arrested. Turns out he was also hiring working girls and stuff. He's in prison now and it's illegal for him to contact me. Oh boy, kinda thought a lot more of these stories would be exaggeration and the restraining orders would be wishful thinking. Turns out we have a bunch of legitimate domestic criminals lined up. Yay! I graduated, she wanted to transfer schools, so we moved to a college town where she told me she had been accepted as a transfer. Turns out the transfer hadn't been accepted, and when she reapplied, that wasn't accepted either. She got a job at Walmart while trying to figure out her next move. After about 2 months, she decided we should move to Pittsburgh. She's convinced this will solve all her problems and make her happy. Except we're in a recession and I just got my first good job. I don't want to move. She became very aggressive. I didn't want to go home. She was constantly negative and on the edge of a screaming fight. I was just avoiding her at the end. We were together 4 years before that, and she was always moody but never prone to these violent outbursts. 6 months of that, she went home to her hometown to take a semester at a local school and stay with her parents. I called her 2 weeks later and told her to not come back. It had been like a weight was lifted from me, and I never wanted to see her again. Listen, I'm glad you got away, but why Pittsburgh? Specific reason? Pittsburgh has magical properties in the water that make all of your troubles go away. I live here, and I know. There's no problems at all. None. Stop looking at me like that. Everything is fine. The weather is perfect. The roads are great. Everyone gets along perfectly fine, I swear. It's great. Everything is wonderful. I moved my ex in way too early. She hated where she was living and I wanted to help her with her mental state, so it seemed like a good idea at the time. She didn't have a job, so I paid for everything. When she finally did get a job, she'd keep all of the money to herself and then quit out of nowhere after a couple of weeks or so. Slowly but surely, she started mistreating me in pretty much every way apart from the stuff in the bedroom, and like a frog boiling in water, I allowed it to happen by justifying it to myself. I even found out about financial abuse being a thing. You know it's a great relationship when it teaches you about a new form of spousal mistreatment. She used her mental issues to manipulate me into buying her so many things, including a frickin' $600 or $700 laptop. As soon as I ran out of money, we started having problems, and 16 grand in credit card debt later, she broke up with me and continued to live in my apartment for another couple of months. She was on a lease, so I couldn't kick her out because legally, the apartment was hers just as much as it was mine. She finally moved out on my birthday, the last December. I'm still picking up the pieces. I dated someone for almost 3 years, starting back in grade 10 in high school. Everything was great for the first year or so, and he treated me well, and we had some things in common. Didn't realize until after we broke up how much of a grade A neckbeard he actually was. Thought for a while that if we stayed together after high school, we could get married because he was my first relationship and I felt like I loved him so much that I'd marry him. Then about 1.5 years into the relationship, he started to show his true colors. His family never had much money, so sometimes I'd help him to pay for stuff. He started to yell and scream if I didn't give him money to buy some game or food that he wanted, and many times he'd embarrass me in the middle of public settings like Walmart. My parents sometimes would also help pay his gas, and that got to a point where he'd come to ask my parents for the money because they hadn't given it to him yet. I didn't want to give him money all the time and even tried calling him out on it. But he'd always scream and yell saying, "How dare I tell him not to take my money, blah blah blah." He generally became emotionally and financially controlling. I didn't know financial abuse was a thing until after we broke up, and the incident that made me really stop loving him was the night he committed the unspeakable act on me. He finally decided that waiting for me to be ready wasn't enough, so he took it. We still dated almost a year after that, but I was just there out of fear of what he'd do if I left him. I finally left him the next year, right before my birthday, after finding out that he'd cheated on me with my now ex-best friend. I wish I'd said something sooner to my parents, but I only told them 3 or 4 years after it happened. Now I hope I never see him again. We were in a long-distance relationship for over 3 years and eventually it started to fizzle. She'd tell me to move to the States and drop my college degree, my family, and my animals to live as an illegal immigrant and that I could just do whatever odd jobs I could just to be with her. I told her I needed to wait. She'd get very upset every time I went out with friends and would bombard my Facebook wall with random crap and send me private messages with passive-aggressive insults and threats of her not being alive anymore. I'd travel up there twice a year whenever I had vacations from uni and spend about 2 months with her, which were always great. She'd just get incredibly possessive and insecure when we were apart because my social life started to blossom down here and she was scared I'd meet someone else. Once I stayed for 6 months until the very last day of my visa. I broke things off with her and moved on, but she kept messaging me asking to be friends. I tried, but she'd randomly blow up at me, insulting me for ruining her life by making her think she could be loved. I told her that she did deserve love, and she'd get even more upset. We just couldn't talk at all. Then she messaged me many years afterwards, telling me that I had a legal obligation to marry her since I said I would 5 years ago, and therefore she expected me to just fly up there and fulfill my obligation. Had to block her. I started dating this girl during my junior year of high school. We dated for about 7 or 8 months when she started becoming a huge flirt. I don't judge, but it's not something I could emotionally handle, so I called it off. I started getting closer to one of my best friends as she was a huge support during the breakup, and eventually I caught the feelings. My ex did not like that. Late one night I saw her flexing her dad's 9mm on her Instagram and in the comments saying, "I'll shoot the both of them." I went to the dean's office at school the next day and she got arrested and spent the night in jail. Actually did end up giving a no-contact order. Yep, that's several orders of magnitude beyond a red flag, isn't it? A red roadblock? Anyway, folks, when you see your exes moving on, surviving and thriving is the best revenge you can get. Public declarations of oncoming vengeance are much further down the list and not really very sensible. I was dating a guy who was very sweet in the beginning. After about 6 months, he got possessive. He didn't trust me. An example of this was one night I told him I was meeting a friend I used to work with at a bar about a block away. We lived in a safe area and it was a short walk. Her name sounded like it could be male or female, but I assured him she was a she. He showed up at the bar while we were there and it made him look very insecure. He began tracking my phone's GPS. I found out when I stopped at a relative's house after work on my way home and he freaked out and called my mum. She actually knew that was where I was and he had a very hard time believing I wasn't cheating. The last straw was my first week at a new job. I worked nights and had my phone. I got this long-winded email regarding an innocent comment on a Facebook selfie of me. There were screenshots of it and a huge manifesto about why my buddies online all wanted to take me away from him. After I broke up with him, I got emails for months swinging between apologies and telling me I was awful. I also got a variety of emails from fake addresses, all concerning him. It was insane. Started dating in high school, had some ups and downs, but at the time I just chalked it up to us being immature. My last 2 years of college really proved that he had some serious issues. When I moved out of state for good, it was like a switch flipped and he got extremely possessive and controlling. He wanted all of my friends' numbers, gave me a schedule of when we need to be in communication, and if I missed any of it, he was blowing up my phone with threats of self-deletion. Finally got the restraining order when he showed up to my friend's apartment looking for me, threatening to call the police because I still had a pair of his shoes, which I didn't even have. I found out that he was attempting to solicit minors. Like a record scratch, it was over. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. This is about my sister. She and her ex dated on and off in high school. At some point in the 8th grade, he admitted he was in love with her, and she admitted she had feelings for him too, so they started dating in the 10th grade. I told her something was off about him. I'm not necessarily an intuitive person. I try my hardest not to judge a situation too quickly, but something about this guy just rubbed me the wrong way. They dated for about 6 months, and he began showing signs of a behavior that really set the alarm bells ringing. Like others have stated, he began calling her and keeping tabs on her. He demanded to know when she made it home and when she went to sleep. He demanded that she edit her social media, MySpace at the time, to include pictures of them and only them so everyone knew that they were together. She visited me in hospital. I had severe stomach flu. Something wasn't right and she told me she wanted to break up with him. She told me she was a bit scared of the guy. He was big, maybe 6'4" and about 230 pounds. My mum begged her to end it with him and she did. The calls kept pouring in for about 2 weeks and she did her best to avoid him. Once I was back in school, I happened to catch an encounter between the two of them. He had her pinned against her locker, telling her she wasn't leaving until they talked things out. I told him to back off and he threatened me, and then she threatened him. He stormed off, punched a locker, broke 2 of his fingers, and then dropped it for a little while. He popped up a few years later on the morning of my sister's wedding with a love letter. We're not sure how he knew she was getting married. We'd all had him blocked on social media. The letter was mailed to our home, which she no longer lived in. He hasn't come around anymore, but honestly, I would not put it past him. My sister's husband is an avid hunter, so that might be what's keeping him away. I'll throw my hat into the ring here. I dated a girl years ago. She was essentially everything I thought I wanted in a girl. She was cute, funny, liked just enough things I liked for us to have common interests, but just different enough to show each other new things and experiences. I was heavy into her and she was heavy into me. Then things got weird. She started getting jealous of high school friends I'd known way before her, and even went as far as telling me I wasn't allowed to hang out with some of my female friends, except for the few she thought were uglier than her. And things got worse. She started getting jealous of inanimate objects like my game consoles and video games, some of which she gave me. It came to a head when my grandmother asked me to watch her dog. It was a tiny little hand dog that I adored, and one day I was half asleep and saw her literally kick this tiny dog off my bed with her feet. I asked her what the hell her problem was, and she told me that she doesn't like that I give the dog more attention than her. Things got even worse. She'd physically bully me in little ways when I did things she didn't like, such as bending my fingers or hitting me in the face, stuff like that. Eventually, everything I did she didn't like. After a while, I got the courage to dump her, and she tried to tell me she was pregnant to keep me, which was an obvious lie. After that, I discovered she'd still stalk my Facebook page and told some of her friends and our mutual friends that I was mistreating her. I also learned that when I was away, she'd let dudes feel her up and other stuff too. Luckily, I've landed a great girl that cares about me and isn't a jealous psycho like my ex was. Yeah, this is pretty dangerous. This sort of person seems to happen across both genders, and I suppose you can just be thankful that she was presumably limited in how far she could go with the physical violence, although I might just be assuming that she was smaller. You really can't win. You can either get an awful guy who's more likely to have a physical advantage, or someone who can fake a pregnancy and claim you forced them to do things. Lose-lose. Just run when bad people of either gender show their true colors, I guess. I was dating a guy. I really liked him. He was smart, funny, adventurous. We were getting pretty serious. He pretty much lived at my house. One weekend I went home for my dad's birthday. All of my brothers were home. I have 5 of them. We ate, drank, and were merry. One of my sister-in-laws took some pictures and posted them on Facebook with me tagged in them. Got back to my house Sunday evening and my boyfriend was coming over shortly to hang out and spend the night. When he got there, he was basically frothing at the mouth. He shoved me and called me a working girl. Started pushing me around, ranting about how he had to see me making seductive poses all over the internet and hanging out with a bunch of guys. I told him they were my brothers, but at that point, I was already done with him. I told him to get the F out of my house. He took that as an invitation to throw me up against a wall and try to force me to kiss him. My roomie heard the commotion and came out of her room with a baseball bat. That moron made the only good decision he had made that day and decided to leave. Kicked in a pantry door and wrecked some drywall on his way out. I threw all of his stuff in a dumpster. He ended up stalking me for years, showing up drunk at places I'd moved to after we'd dated, calling after I'd changed my number, even texted me on the week of my wedding to ask me to reconsider marrying him instead. Yeah, you crazy F, I want to dump the love of my life for a crazy stalker. We were spending a large amount of time together, with me staying at his house several nights of the week. He went mad one day because he said we weren't spending enough time together. He pulled out a notepad and drew up a schedule outlining in excruciating detail each hour that I'd spend with him throughout the week from then on. I distinctly remember sitting there, saying nothing and feeling like I was in the twilight zone. Things got significantly crazier from then on, but that moment always stuck out in my mind. The worst version I have of this was a guy who I'd been dating who rammed my truck with a moving van repeatedly at an immigration checkpoint in New Mexico well after dark. He thought it was funny. He had been behaving badly, but I thought it was just the stress of the move. The aggravated attack by U-Haul is when I decided to break up with him. He stalked me for years after that, pestering me at work, which led to me getting fired. I switched from law firm to legal software, and that seemed to make it harder to find me. His stalking ended with him blowing up a brick-and-mortar mailbox with plastic explosives. I think he laid low after that because the FBI were after him. He eventually moved back to California years later. An ex-girlfriend of his contacted me about 7 years later when she was settling his estate. She wanted to make sure there weren't any children. Started dating not long after a previous relationship. At first, everything was amazing and I did everything for this girl. For my 21st birthday, we went to Alton Towers with 2 of my friends, 1 boy and 1 girl. We stayed over at the hotel. We were all in the same room having a drink and a laugh when suddenly my girlfriend stormed out of her room for no reason. Rightly so, I follow her back to our room to ask what's up. Before I could even finish my sentence, she punched me square in the face, gets me to the floor, and then kicks me about 5 or 6 times. I ask why, and it's because I'm apparently always looking at my friend, the female one. Anyway, in the morning we set off home and I assumed all was well. We drop my friends off and as I pull up to her house, she puts her feet on my windscreen and kicks it 3 or 4 times, cracking it. Not sure why I stayed with her for a month after this as she scratched my face repeatedly when I accepted an old school friend on Facebook. I started dating this amazing girl, but she was just getting out of a very traumatic marriage and I was her first female partner. She started showing up at my work with flowers and coffee, which was sweet, but I'd never told her where my office was. Then she started showing up at my house at all hours and would get upset when I needed to sleep. I worked graveyard shifts. She then wanted me to meet her daughters, which I wasn't comfortable with because we were in the first stages of a relationship. I decided to break it off. She was just too needy, which was understandable coming from someone who'd just left an awful relationship and discovered their sexuality, but I wasn't the person that could guide her. She decided that I was just afraid of love and started leaving books of poetry on my porch and leaving long letters in my mailbox. I finally had to call law enforcement after I came home to her in my bed. She had taken a ladder to my second-story room window, I lived with roommates, and she had broken in. I found her undressed in my bed, covered in blood from several intentional incisions. She proceeded to tell me that I was the only thing keeping her alive. I cut off all contact, but I truly hope that she's gotten some help and is doing well. She was a wonderful woman, but so broken. It's good of you to be able to see her qualities. A lot of us would have had a very hard time seeing the positives in someone after finding them bleeding out in our bed, and possibly thinking that they'd passed away there. That's a super scary image. I hope she got the help she needed. My relationship with my ex in uni seemed really great. He loved me a lot and was super attentive. I even went on holiday with his family at some point, and I thought we'd marry eventually and start a family. Long story short, when I got busy with school, the final year, and didn't see him as often, he started getting clingy and jealous of everyone, including my female friends. I tried to break up with him probably 3 times before he accepted it. I explained how I wanted to focus on my studies and the situation wasn't good for either of us. The last time he seemed to understand my point and we remained friends. This also didn't last long and he eventually started stalking me online and in person and constantly bothering my friends. He managed to go to my senior year party even though he wasn't in my year. Eventually he texted me calling me a skank and that I'd cheated on him, all the usual accusations. He told this to all of our mutual friends in uni, so that was fun. He acted like a total lunatic, begging for me to reconsider a friendship after that, but obviously there was no chance of that. The last straw was him showing up at the graduation ceremony, making it awkward for me and all of my family. She punched me in the face while I was sleeping. Apparently, my phone had woken her up when I received a text in the middle of the night from a girl asking if there was any chance I could come pick her up. My girlfriend assumed I was cheating and figured that the most efficient way of addressing her concerns was just to punch me in the face, hard, while I lay there sleeping. The text was from a non-Alabamian cousin who had some sort of semi-emergency and needed to get picked up from a party. He pushed a little girl in a store because she tried to pet his emotional support dog. Instead of just picking up the dog, he laid hands on a little girl. There's a lot more to that, but that one sticks out the most. I recently found out he was arrested again. Did your high school crush age like a fine wine or burn out like a bright star? Mine had a roller coaster of a life. I admire him more now than ever, and more than most people I know, but I can't wrap my head around why I ever found him physically attractive. Maybe it was just always his heart. By age 25, he had a PhD, a wife, and was captain in the Navy. By 30, he had 2 PhDs, a small business where he made a metric butt-ton of money, and his wife was preggers. By 31, he was diagnosed with stage 4 skin cancer that swiftly spread to his lymph nodes, bones, esophagus, and a few other places. He was told he had a minimal chances of making it more than 5 years. Even with the best health insurance money can buy, it still basically wiped him out. 7 years later, he's living a comfortable but not extravagant life as a civilian contractor for the Navy. Same wife and 2 happy, healthy kids, and spends most of his free time advocating for better public healthcare. I remember walking up to her and asking if we could talk in private. She said, "You can say what you need to in front of everyone else." Her group of friends was all around us, so I asked if she wanted to go on a date. She burst out laughing and said, no. It was rough, man. Looked her up last year and she's a cage fighter now. Mine, unfortunately, decided to not be alive anymore. Found out later she had a crush on me as well. Frick life sometimes. They began acting. It's weird. Every so often I'll see a commercial or something and be like, oh hey, I know them. My crush is an incredibly sweet person, so I'm happy for them. I had 2 unrealized crushes in high school. One is a teacher and musician. She's married and has either 1 or 2 kids. We've kept in loose contact via social media and ran into each other at a New Year's Eve party shortly before she got married. I was introduced to her now husband as her favorite ex ever. He seemed like a decent guy and I'm happy for her. I believe the other crush became a US attorney. I haven't heard from her since Google Plus almost became a social media thing. I imagine she's still very productive and would be disappointed in my life choices. He's an attractive gay man, and I am none of those things. Same with my crush. He was my first serious crush and my first slow dance at a middle school dance. Now he's gay, attractive, was in the military, and owns a photography studio. He does some great headshots. My English teacher still looks fine as F. You know, I had wondered how many of these answers would be teachers, and that's our first confirmed one. We've had other people say that they had crushes who were teachers now, but I'm not sure if they were teachers or students at the time of said crush. My only girlfriend in high school was my crush. Her mum banned her from dating me after about a year because my girlfriend admitted to her mum that we were fooling around. This was about 20 years ago. She's still living with her mum, no kids, and as far as I know, never dated seriously after her mum broke us up. Still has the same job from high school too. It's like her mum went way into protective overdrive and my former girlfriend never got to grow up. It's really sad. I met her in 1987. We got married 5 years ago. We used to go to the same punk shows. That's where we met. Mine was my best friend. She turned out to be a criminal. She always liked younger guys, like when she was 17 and had a 13-year-old boyfriend, which was odd, but we were kids and didn't think about it much. Turns out her tastes didn't age with her and it became legally problematic. Found her on Tinder and she said I was hot. Pointed out that I was a loser that she used to know in high school. Had a big laugh. Been a little over a year, now we send each other memes and hang out occasionally when the pandemic isn't being a hassle. She's still hot, successful and a wealthy entrepreneur and married someone with the same first name as me who quit his job to brew beer. I crushed on her for a bit. Didn't think she was interested, so I dated other people. Then came to find out she crushed on me senior year, I was too dumb and blind, we connected freshman year of college, and she wrote me letters, and by the time I wised up, she'd moved on. Nobody to blame but myself. Dead by 32. Don't do substances, kids. You know, just seeing this is making me wonder what I ever saw in them. His friend unalived him over a girl. I had a childhood friend, he and I both had the same name, so we called each other by first name, last initial. He got killed in a similar fashion. He was only 24. It was freaking senseless, and the guy who killed him is going away for a long time. Was it worth it, buddy? I was a freshman and had a crush on a senior. To add to it, she was a cheerleader and her brother played quarterback for the football team, and got a college scholarship. She showed up at a football game a couple of years later with a baby in tow. She's married now and back in her hometown. That's about all I know. They both ended up as great guys. One has a huge family and is a minister. The other one only has one child and is a college professor. Both married nice people and they seem happy. They were really good guys in high school and ended up being really good adults. I've got both of them on Facebook and we keep in touch peripherally as we stayed friends over the years. I don't know about you guys, but I had way too many crushes in high school to be able to follow any one of them. Yeah, I had a lot of crushes, but the one that stands out was two sisters who both ended up becoming doctors. I did not become a doctor. An insanely talented molecular biology researcher at Boston, and she's still insanely attractive. Okay, people are writing to me and it looks like a lot of people feel like they know the same person. It's crazy how many hot molecular biologists people know. My crush is about to be my fiancé if all goes well. Became a professional cheerleader, died of cancer at 34. Googling names from high school is crazy. My first high school crush who sat next to me in freshman year English was a really cute punk rock girl, and she's gone on to become an incredibly hot fitness model. Haha, my husband. Our first marriages didn't work out and we reconnected after our divorces. If only I would have confessed I had a crush on him in high school, might have saved myself a lot of trouble. Huh. My crush is still hot as F. Yep, they still don't know you exist either. I briefly worked with mine and didn't realize it was her until I left for another job. She looked almost unrecognizable, but it was 15 years after I last saw her. She's married with a couple of kids now, so pretty standard life, I guess. My friend's high school crush was Tom Holland, like they went to the same school. I never made a move in high school. About 7 years after graduating, I saw her on social media and said, "What the hell?" and asked her out. We've been dating for about 2 years and I'm about to pop the big question. This hot D-bag who doesn't really do much except to go to the gym. To be fair, that's how he was in high school, I just liked it back then. If you wanted to always date Chip Matthews from high school, you're gonna end up on a date with Chip Matthews from high school. Yeah, isn't it weird how some of the winners from school end up peaking there and then unless they're capable of change? I know a lot of former people who might have been described as losers in school whose quality of life and status has changed so drastically once they move to a different environment. So don't lose hope in school, kids. Back when I was younger and crushing hard, I got on AOL Instant Messenger and had gotten my crush's screen name from a friend. I worked up the nerve to start a conversation with him, and soon after some awkward small talk, he sent me a message in Comic Sans, black background, red lettering, and in French. I then went to Google for translation and found out he'd just called me a pig in French. Being a seemingly awkward and chubby teenager, I was literally crushed. The heartbreak was only made worse by remembering that a few weeks prior, I'd selected to take French class the next year and couldn't change it. Years later, now that I've blossomed, he follows me on every social media platform and has reached out a couple of times to try and flirt or hang out. Hard pass, man. I believe he's now moved away and is a teacher. I ended things a few years after high school. She was a teacher and got caught having an affair with a female student. Took too many substances and unfortunately passed away last year. I got to see him before he was taken off life support with a really good mutual friend we shared, who was an organ donor too. It was surreal seeing him dwarfed by all these machines. He had one of the largest hearts I've ever come across. She ended up getting knocked up by a freshman shortly after we graduated. She passed away our senior year, 6 months after she agreed to marry me after we graduated. She's still a 10 for looks. I'm sure she kept on as the amazing kind person that she was. She moved to another country, speaks multiple languages, and is more successful than I imagined. Seems happy, but we haven't talked since the time I told her how I felt about 20 years ago. Went on to be a teenaged model for hair products, graduated from Yale, toured Europe, opened her own successful ceramics company that's sold worldwide, and is often written up in magazines. Makes me feel like crap every time I think of her. Going to an all-boys school sucks for having realistic crushes. However, I ran into one of the teachers years later, and she still looks bellissima. I checked when I saw the question, and she's actually a very successful artist and an art teacher from a renowned university in France. She even got decorated for her work, Chevalier des Arts et des Lettres. It's a big deal award. My high school ex randomly sent me a text years after we split up that went, "I know you don't like metal, but I thought you would like this," and a link to a clarinet cover of a metal song. I played clarinet in high school. Little did he know that I hated playing clarinet and was now a total metalhead. My crush has a dog and I don't. There was a girl I really admired for a while. She didn't really give me the time of day after freshman year though. She was co-valedictorian and hugged me as I crossed the stage at graduation, and nobody else got a hug. I'm still really confused about that 6 years later. She went on to med school and is either married or at least engaged to a guy she met there. Overall, she's doing really well and I'm happy for her. Sounds like she's a nice person and probably knew you liked her, but didn't want to give you the wrong idea. She probably hugged you because she hoped for the best for you. You were her #1 fan. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I had several. One of them's still a close friend and he became a primary care doctor. He also officiated my wedding. There's another one who I have no idea what happened to. We didn't really have overlapping friend groups and she doesn't do social media. One of them is a math professor now, so that's pretty cool. But my biggest crush in high school was my longtime neighbor, but it also fizzled out pretty quickly after we went to homecoming together. We're still good friends and our families still keep in touch. He's also the guy who introduced me to my husband. I had 3. 1 from the first 2 years and 2 from the last 2. The first one is now female to male trans, who walked to Colorado to join a cult or commune. He's now in Arizona recording rap albums. The second girl moved to Florida and lives in a swamp. She periodically hits me up to tell me she misses me and how dumb I was that I didn't follow through and that we should get married. The third was a missionary. She wasn't really into it once she grew up, came back home, and I introduced her to one of my closest friends. They've been married for 15 years. 0 out of 3. Why didn't you marry Shrek, the second one? Hedge fund manager with a trophy wife. She turned out great. She married me. We actually met in kindergarten. We reconnected through Facebook in our late 40s. Now I can't stand Facebook anymore. Now she's my wife. She's still beautiful. One I don't keep track of at all. I'm not sure what she's up to. The other one I married. She turned out awesome. I'm just checking in to confirm that I was no one's high school crush, and carry on. Ditto. Nobody's written about a YouTube narrator with a weird accent yet. One day, narrator. One day. Still super hot, she married some loser and has a few kids with him. That loser was me. We just celebrated 22 years of marriage. One I don't keep track of at all. I'm not sure what she's up to. The other I married. She turned out awesome. Blink twice if you're being held hostage. She worked with the Obama administration, I forget in what capacity. Got married to some politician's son. I don't remember and don't care to look it up. She's happy and that's the only thing that matters. Oh, she was also our school's valedictorian. She was so busy with her job that she couldn't organize our high school reunion, so that's a plus. I wasn't head over heels for her, I admired her, but I knew I wasn't for her. Then there's another crush of mine. We ran into each other years after graduation at a grocery store. After talking, I asked her out to dinner at my house. I pull out all of the stops, I buy rainbow trout fillet and make up all the fixings. 6:30 rolls around, I open the door, and who the hell is that man behind her? Oh, this is my fiancé. She'd neglected to tell me she was bringing him. Turns out they wanted to sell me on some multi-level marketing thing. She tried to cross the threshold, I put my arm out and asked them politely to leave. I turned away from the door and had my saddest meal that I've ever eaten in my life. Pretty good. Seems to have her life together, although she had a few setbacks. She's gone back to uni since job prospects in her field kinda sucked, but seems to be really enjoying it. She's dating me though, so clearly her judgment sucks. I found out she was fat and unattractive. Then I realized I was too. He turned out pretty well, joined the military and served for a number of years. He was in after Vietnam and out before the Gulf War, so I'm not sure if he actually saw much active duty. He then settled in Korea where he trained in Taekwondo and did a lot of professional fighting and won a bunch of awards. Attained the rank of Grand Master and returned to the US and opened a very successful school that specializes in Taekwondo and Hapkido. He's opened additional locations and is currently looking to open one in our old hometown. I imagine that will have to wait until after COVID. I had a few in high school. One ended up moving away after sophomore year and nobody knew why. She reached out to me when I had a mental breakdown online and said that she could understand what I was going through. Some effed up crap happened to her, though she never said what specifically. I didn't ask further because it wasn't my business to pry. I'm not sure how she is now. Another one got super hot after high school and she did a degree in science. Again, not sure where she is now, but I think she's doing alright. And the third works at a bank. We ended on bad terms. Partially my fault. I found out she was making fun of me behind my back and had done so for months beforehand, so I sent her an angry message. I haven't seen her since then. Still cute as heck, one of the kindest and most sensitive people I know, and still one of my best friends 15 years later. He also recently divorced. His wife was gay, but needed time and support to come to terms with it. Now he and I are slowly testing the waters. What started as a crush has matured into a deep and rich friendship, and however it might unfold, I'm so grateful to have that relationship in my life. That's how I got my husband. His wife left him for his best friend. Obviously, he was going through a divorce after, and we became best friends. We were always good friends, but it got so much better and we fell in love. It's been 10 years and I can't believe I married such a little hottie. Good luck! She was aware of the crush then, over 30 years ago, but it was unrequited. We've been in casual contact through her Facebook for the past several years, and once before that, my wife at the time, and I had her and her husband over for dinner. From what I can tell, she's grown into a person I probably would have been happy with. It's nice to see my high school perspective got a few things right. I think we'd be good friends if we lived closer. She appears to be living a good life with her husband and family. With my second wife, I'm happier than I could have ever imagined. Life worked out well. Turns out I was attracted to losers and burnouts. That hasn't changed much. Turns out he's gay and got fired from a teaching job for having inappropriate behavior with his male students. Ugh, mine are all stunning and wildly successful. One in particular was a crush with a similar name to mine, dating back from my elementary school, which turned out to be the longest crush, an entire decade, and still appearing in a looping dream sequence to this day. Especially after that bitter and frankly traumatic rejection before we parted ways when I confessed to her. At that point, we were classmates for 5 years and were going to different schools. After the separation, that's when the dreams began, and every time I woke up I was feeling emotional all over again. It took me another painful 5 years before I stopped crushing on her, but the dreams never stopped. Just last week I had an update to the dream sequence where we actually talked for the first time in a decade of Groundhog Day levels of dreams. I know, it's pathetic. Life update on that particular crush though. She's currently aspiring to be an architect and had an equally cool boyfriend, so I doubt she ever looked back on her past as much as I do. I recently tried to follow her on her socials to get a life update from herself, but she won't accept my requests, so I'm not going to force her. She's a TikTok influencer who shaved off her eyebrows and draws symbols on her face. Yeah. One is still active duty in the military and has a very successful career as an officer. I hope she continues. The other is successful in the arts, and I hope she continues to be that as well. Both are married to others who treat them well. I'm happy that they're both happy. My life is still going good here, so I have no hard feelings. She married some idiot and had my babies. Man, I hope you can get your babies back. Best of luck. Yeah, I was about to say, either this is very sweet or you have very much wronged some other poor guy. If it's the latter, I hope you, your crush, and the hapless fellow in question can sort out an agreement regarding your illegitimate offspring. The guy I crushed on for 2.5 years did not end up turning out great. I'm still friends with his younger sister, so I know that he's recently acquired his 3rd DUI and his 2nd divorce. He's currently living in his friend's basement and occasionally works for his friend's moving company as a mover, but only when he feels like it. He spends all of his money on booze and owes the 2 mums of his 5 kids tons of child support. But man, was he hot in high school. My second crush in high school is the only reason I got over my first crush. He's currently doing great, mostly because he gets to be married to me for going on 20 years. Harvard, degrees in writing and medicine, became a lead surgeon in a major city. Extremely proud of her. Always had her on a pedestal, I guess with good reason. One of them is homeless and a substance addict. It's very sad. The other one is famous in his home country, is a best-selling author, and is regularly on TV. Don't have a crush on him anymore, but I'm glad we're still friends, and I'm happy for how well he's done. I guess they balance each other out. Multiple degrees, on track to becoming a full-time educator, mother of 2, and my wife. I'm so lucky. Turned out to be gay. So did I. It worked out perfectly. Divorced with 2 kids. I took her and her kids to lunch after meeting her in a mall one day. I hadn't seen her in over 10 years. We caught up on some small talk and I asked the kids if they were hungry, and they said yes. I just wanted to spend more time with her. After lunch, I asked if I could see her again, and she laughed at me and said, "I could never go out with someone like you." She said the exact same thing to me in high school. That's my life. I'm not good enough for anyone. Nah, dude, screw that. I get not being attracted to someone, but saying it like that is super messed up, especially after you fed her kids. Like at least say, let's be friends, or something. He's still hot, got a part-time scholarship to study engineering, and is now dating a Miss Spain runner-up. She's bi and married a woman. She's a speech therapist now. Still really good looking and still a nice person. I'm happy her life turned out well. A racist person who has 3 kids with 3 different women. I'm glad I was too shy to ever make a move on him. Mine is just the same as when we were leaving school. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why he is an ex. What happened when you found the secret room in your home? I found the secret space in my closet when my mum and I were moving out of the house where she was renting to move into my stepdad's house. I never noticed it because junk covered the section of the wall that was covering a small entrance to a room that was sealed off with boards and plywood. I couldn't pry it open, but I could see light shining in and a single mason jar filled with what I assumed was water. The air was cold in there, like as if the central heating didn't even reach that part. I showed it to my mum and she told me that she doesn't remember seeing that there when we moved in 8 years prior, but since we were moving out, it didn't matter. The room gave me the creeps for whatever reason. I don't know why it was sealed off or why there was a single mason jar filled with water in the center of the room. I lived in a warehouse in Melbourne. Always thought it would be cool to get on the roof, but there was no access. After about 6 months, I'm standing in front of a mirror upstairs when I notice it has hinges. I push on it, clicks and opens out, revealing a small attic and roof hatch. That was pretty cool. Used to sit up there and watch the sunset over the city. It wasn't a room, but after living in our house for a few years, we decided to remodel the basement bathroom. Tore out the old shower enclosure and found a window behind it. Said window was covered on the outside by an apron of siding that came from the cantilevered room upstairs all the way down to the concrete pad. We tore off the siding apron and let some light in. It was much better. We were doing a bathroom reno as well, but also there was a covered window because you could still see the window from the outside. Ripped off the shower enclosure and now we have a nice window in our bathroom. Why people would cover up a window leaves me confused. We moved into a house with a door in the kitchen that could not be opened. The real estate tried but failed, assumed it led to the laundry room but was walled off. My older siblings, like any typical teenagers, were not convinced about this and were determined to open it. It was just a normal pantry, but they never told our mother that they managed to get the door open and used to hide things like alcohol, smokes, and green herb. Watched Home Alone and saw the attic that Macaulay Culkin was staying in and wondered if we had one in our townhouse. Ran around with the stepladder until I found it in my mum's closet. Got my tiptoes on the stepladder and fought the door open. It ended up being a big piece of plywood. And then I peered into the attic. A mouse colony stared back. It was like that scene in Ratatouille. Decades worth of mouse droppings covering the entire space. My mum wasn't happy once I told her. We moved shortly afterwards. Oh god. That feels like one of those things you close up and hope like heck people don't discover while they're viewing the house. Mouse infestation might take you down a bit in value. Also, they're too cute for me to exterminate with a clean conscience. My parents bought a house from an old family member to help her pay for nursing home care. She hadn't lived in the house for years at that point. She was a hoarder, and we were tasked with cleaning up the house over the course of the summer in order to make it livable prior to the start of school. Rat carcasses fused to the carpet, old tax documents from the 60s. Well, we were scraping up the linoleum tiling, covering the original hardwood floor, disappointingly enough, in a side room when I made the joke about the previous resident being a secret mass killer and that there was a trapdoor under the linoleum full of dead bodies. Pulled up a huge section of tiling, only to find a trapdoor underneath. Scared the crap out of me, but when we finally built up enough courage to open the damned thing, we discovered there was nothing under there. It was a walled-off section of the basement with a dirt floor. We suspect it was an old root cellar from back when farmers had to store their crap in a cold, dark place to prevent it from spoiling. A couple of years ago, I rented an apartment that was in a massive old architecture-style building. No idea how old it was. I remember when I did the showing, they showed me a door that had an elaborate staircase that went straight up to the ceiling and explained that it went to the attic, which was sealed up. When I was finally moving out, curiosity got the best of me and I pushed on the panel at the top of the stairs until it popped open and I hoisted myself up there. It was completely dark and the floor was covered in at least an inch of dust, and I found out that it was an entire extra floor to my unit. There was some old rotting furniture and magazines littered throughout the rooms. I eventually found a small hole in one of the walls that went into the sealed-off upstairs of the unit next to mine, and I decided to go through that one too. I found a smaller hole at the back end of that area that led to the next one. I eventually made my way through about 5 or 6 of these sealed-off spaces that had no entrances save these small holes in the drywall. The further I went in, the older the furniture I found. Fridges from the 50s or earlier, old dishware, and so much dust over everything. The last unit was the most interesting. Hand-painted scenes on the walls and holes to the attic letting sunlight stream in. I took small videos, but they're all on Snapchat, so they're hard to post. I must have been up there for hours just exploring alone in the dark. I was pretty lucky to have the only room with access up there. When clearing out my grandma's house, I found a small door in the wall of the basement that led to a tiny room. According to my mother, that's where they hid the family heirlooms when thieving relatives came to town. I was mostly interested in the fact that it was covered in scribbles from my mum and her sisters growing up. Back in college, some friends and I rented an old mansion that had been built in the early 1920s by an elderly lady. The place was falling apart, but it was huge and rent was dirt cheap. About 2 years into living there, I went to the basement to do some laundry and momentarily lost balance, reaching out to steady myself on one of the wall panels. It flexed more than I expected, and after some inspection, I found that it was removable. Behind it was a small, mostly empty, very dirty concrete room about 100 square feet. I say mostly empty because right in the middle there was a hole the size of a well that had been previously bricked up. It must have been old because the bricks had eroded at some point and exposed some of the hole, maybe 2 feet in diameter out of the full 5 feet. After calling my friends down to look at it, I got the courage to creep a little closer and peered down into it. There was another room, roughly the same size but deep, maybe 15 feet down and mostly dirt. We shined a flashlight into it, and I could swear there was a teddy bear at the bottom. Unfortunately, despite plenty of bargaining, none of us were ever able to work up the courage, liquid or regular, to tie a rope and climb down for a closer look, especially after we noticed that the bricks which I thought had fallen in were all accounted for, scattered around the hole as if something had broken outwards. At the risk of this account being discovered by my friends, this was in Pittsburgh. We did a little research, and I think the sub-basement might have been related to prohibition, but honestly, I'm just willing to accept that explanation in order to avoid lifelong nightmares of creatures bursting out. My friend had a thing like this in their basement in Boston. They called it the Hole, and we had weird hole-themed parties. Helping my granddad move house, we accidentally found access to the underfloor area. Not even big enough to really call a crawl space, I don't think. Spotty memory. There was a small pile of trash from the 60s or 70s. Juice cans, chocolate bar wrappers, and crumpled newspapers, and bits of discarded construction debris and some broken tools. We think it must have been used by the builders in lieu of a trash can. It was cool, an accidental time capsule. It was about a year into owning our house. We actually found 2 secret rooms. One was just a room under the stairs that was closed off. Had some toys from the 70s in it. The really crazy one was when we redid the insulation in our attic. One of the workers asked if I knew there was a room up there. I had no idea. So he cut open the drywall and there were stacks on stacks of boxes from the 60s. Like a ton of boxes, and they were all full. So I opened them up expecting some cool stuff, and they were frickin' full of pine cones. One of the biggest bummers of my life. Moved into an 18th century farmhouse as a little kid and found a small panel door in the back of the large closet in my small room. Turned out to be a small finished room over the eaves that had a small portal window. I spent hours in that room reading and hiding from the world. I think any child would love to have this. Honestly, I think most adults, including the narrator, would love to have it too. I might even have put my recording booth in there, although actually it sounds like it has too much cozy reading potential. Thank goodness your family never counted the windows. There was a hidden door behind the wallpaper. Obviously, the doorknob had been taken off, so it blended in with the wall. We lived in this house for 6 years, and I found out about this door in our hallway 2 years ago when we opened it up and I saw a skeleton in the corner. I'm not gonna lie, that scared me shirtless, although it was just a prop left by the past owners of our house. It was probably left there to scare the crap out of you when you found it as a joke. While installing Cat 5e network cables many years ago in my house, I discovered a short and squat cast iron water heater inside some walls, between a staircase and a bathroom, connecting the basement and the next level of our house. I'm guessing whoever did the remodel didn't think that the little bit of space that could be reclaimed was worth it. I found it when I realized my measurements weren't making sense and I couldn't figure out why I wasn't seeing my Ethernet cable. I had to plot everything out carefully because of the split-level nature of my house, the crawl spaces, the basements, stuff like that. I figured there was 3 feet of space unaccounted for. It will probably be removed when we remodel the basement bathroom. I figure I can either get more storage space or a full bathtub instead of just a shower stall that's there now. Growing up, my dad's hoarding was pretty bad and my childhood home was pretty old. Around my pre-teens, I started trying to navigate through the clutter to parts of the house I'd truly never seen because of all the junk. I found this door that had been blocked off and I eventually moved stuff around enough that I could open the door. Which was hard because the room was big, but he filled it so much that the only way to navigate it was a single narrow path through the clutter. Behind the door was trippy to me as a kid because the back couple of rooms in the house were rotted and collapsed in places, so my parents just blocked it off, I guess. Going from my packed house to this completely empty, collapsing ruin was actually really interesting to me. I used to try and navigate through it until one day I fell through the floor and landed underneath the house with my head a couple of inches from a nail pointing up from the ground. I don't remember if I ever went back through the door after that. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Not quite a secret room or space, but when my parents were doing renovations on our childhood home, the house was roughly 100 years old at the time, they found an old safe, quite small, in the wall that had been left open with a bottle of either port or rum and a long faded note inside. The builder helping Dad said it was common to find the odd bottle of alcohol in walls during renos on old homes, as there was a tradition for a while where one homeowner leaves a hidden bottle for the next to find during a time of construction or renovations. We couldn't determine how old the bottle was, as all of the labeling had faded, but Dad went and bought a new bottle of port and put it in the old safe with a laminated note before sealing it back up for the next owner to find. My old house was a duplex. There was a hobbit-sized door on the bottom floor, and I glanced in there a few times but only saw pipes and different electrical units and stuff. There was some sort of landlord's, maybe past residents junk in the corner. After a few years, I explored behind it and realized it led to the other half of the duplex. We bought a house that had been built in the 1880s, lived in it for 7 years and then had to have some wiring work done. The electrician was working down in the basement and wanted to drill through a brick wall to the outside for some reason that I no longer remember. We gave him the okay and go about our business. He starts drilling and then stops, comes upstairs and tells us he's just found a bricked up room and what do we want to do about it. Well, we still kind of want our wiring situation taken care of, but if there's a body and some Amontillado in there, I definitely want to know. On the other hand, I don't want to let my sister's boyfriend knock the wall down with a sledgehammer. As we're discussing this, the electrician offers to run a scope through the hole he's just drilled so we can take a look without doing more damage, or as he put it, destroying evidence. So, our new friend gets his scope set up and we all go down to the basement and watch the monitor. It's a very small space, maybe 3 by 5 feet. Nothing in there but a really old, gross-looking plushie. Not a teddy bear, maybe a dog? It was sewed out of some kind of patent fabric in a vaguely dog-like shape. That's it, nothing else. The electrician asks us what we want to do. I ask if he can seal the hole he just drilled because this is definitely how ghost movies start. He agreed and patched it up. Drilled somewhere else, finished the rewiring, and we all continued our lives. We moved out 2 years later, and as far as I know, haunted doggy is still bricked up in the basement of that house. Found it moving in. Latch at the bottom of the corner of the closet. Cape Cod-style house, crawl space to basically uncarpeted room with 2 windows over garage. I fell through one time. Hidden closet in a basement wall after 20 years of living in this home. We found some personal documents with no real interest, a newspaper from the day after Pearl Harbor, and a hand-drawn cartoon of pregnant Lucy yelling, "God damn it, Charlie Brown!" I found a stash of firearms in a secret room underneath my staircase a week after moving in. In my house, there was an upstairs bedroom that was made into a game room for me and my sister. When we were about 12 years old, we realized that a section of the paneling came off and there was a small closet-sized room behind it. We kept it a secret so that when friends came over, we'd have the ultimate hiding spot for hide and seek. A few years later, we were talking to our parents about what we found, and they said that the house was built during the Prohibition era, so they most likely used it as a place to hide alcohol. You know, I would have never guessed that Prohibition-era stashing would be one of our most recurring answers here. Turns out every other person was just holding a keg and some bottles of whiskey for whenever the local speakeasy was closed. The more you know. There was a small door under some stairs, almost like Harry Potter's room in my old apartment in Venezuela. We'd lived there for a year until I leaned on it and felt it wiggle a little and realized it was a small square door. I was too scared to open it, so I had my dad do it, and about 20 or so cockroaches flooded out. Never have I felt so much panic. I went to visit my grandparents a few months after they'd moved into a new house out in the country. I got into a bit of horseplay with a cousin and got shoved into a wall. It broke a big hole and we realized there was a large empty space back there. With Grandpa's help, we tore the wall down and found a little room full of planting trays and grow lamps. There was a number of books about horticulture and one specifically about growing Mary J. There was no secret way in as far as we could tell. Someone had just walled off the entire room for some reason. In a house a friend was renting, I realized that there was a missing 5 feet between the back wall of the master bedroom and the back wall of the garage. Poking around the garage, I found a piece of plywood with concealed hinges, held shut with 2 nails. Opened it and found a 12 by 5 room with walls covered with foil and a couple of outlets for lamps on the ceiling. My friend converted it into a walk-in closet. I lived in the house of my grandma for a few years. The secret room beneath a trapdoor on the 2nd floor was basically a void between walls on the complicated 1st floor. It was used to hide Jewish families during World War II. We couldn't find the access to the crawl space during the first inspection. We didn't want to buy the house until we saw every inch, especially vibratio foundation. Turns out one of the closets had such a perfect carpet job you couldn't tell the floor was a carpeted door. You have to pull the carpet to lift it. Nothing interesting in there apart from a small crack. My student house at university. I lived there a couple of months before the gas meter guy came around and asked where the meter was. Us 4 clueless students had no idea, so he was like, "Maybe it's in the basement." We said we didn't have a basement. He basically says, "Sure you do." Goes over to the edge of the carpet in the hall, pulls it up and reveals a large door in the floor, which leads to a basement. The gas meter turned out to be out back, but we liked our new basement. I had to do this a lot when installing TV. You don't have an attic, so I've got to get under the house. Way too many people don't realize they're sitting on top of anything from a simple crawl space to a full-on basement. A lot of the time they're renters and the landlord doesn't want them in the basement for whatever reason. It's not my problem, I'm just running cable. I bought a house back in 2010. There was a wooden box next to an old oak tree in my backyard. It had no doors and no way to look into it. The box was about as big as a love seat and it looked as old as the house, about 30 years. But it was very well kept, no bug damage. I waited for about 2 years until I got the nerve to open it, and it was empty. It wasn't our house, but a secret room in our barn. When we moved to the property, the barn was full of all kinds of stuff, so it took about 5 years to find it. We were kids building a fort, moved some old wooden packing boxes and found a little door. There was a bunch of Christmas decorations from the 70s, including a cutout of Santa, so when we saw his head we thought we'd found a body. I never said we were smart kids. Once we realized it was just decorations, we crawled in to explore and fell through the floor to the rooms below. Good times when my dad found the collapsed ceiling in the wood shop. Whoops! My old house had this weirdly large concrete slab in the corner of the yard that was covered by a ton of leaves when we moved in. I thought it was maybe the foundation for a shed, but it was in a very odd location. Years later, when I was getting ready to move, it bugged me that I didn't know what it was for. I got a friend to help me come dig around it, expecting to confirm that it was just an old foundation. We dug for days in the middle of August. We had to start digging at night to protect ourselves from the heat. We got about 15 feet down, and the concrete wasn't showing any signs of ending. We eventually struck a pipe with a nozzle and discovered that there was more concrete moving towards the center of the yard. About a week later, my dad came home and almost had a stroke when he saw we were digging up half the yard. We'd sold the house and were expected to leave by September 1st. He made us fill it all in, and I left home never finding out what it was. Some of my teachers, who were long-term town residents, told me that my neighborhood had been farmland before development and that there may have been several bomb or fallout shelters in the area. I would have loved to have found an entrance into the bunker if that's what it was. I just googled concrete septic tank, and it definitely seems like you were trying to get into an old tank of poo-poo. Yeah, as cool as finding a fallout shelter seems, I think on the off chance that you could have cracked open a container filled with feces, you were probably better off not knowing, right? Not my house, but my elementary school, a small one in the countryside. 1990, after some PE hours, a friend of mine and I were horsing around downstairs in the basement outside the locker rooms. In the process, we tackled each other with shoulder pushes, and my friend flew into a panel at some point, where a screw popped out of a panel that revealed overpainted screws that revealed a panel door. The janitor thought it was just the ducts for air or a water pipe maintenance under the school when we told him about the door, and asked, and he said he came to the school in 1971, but never had been in there. Of course, the two of us being 6th graders, we had to go on a hunt and later returned with a screwdriver after school hours. The school wasn't locked due to an after-school club in the same place. We entered with a flashlight. It was a secret basement of ducts at first, super dusty, and metal stamps revealed at least something in the corridors was built in 1959. The school was built in the 1950s. But the fun part was when the 1x1 meter ducts suddenly ended out in a slightly larger room, 2 meters tall and probably 5 meters by 2 meters total. It had old equipment, like tables and stuff with military emblems on them, and we thought, of course, it could have been an old Third Reich headquarters or something, not adding 2 and 2 together to figure out that the school was built later than 1945. But it was an old nuclear shelter thing that later was revealed to be a cancelled part of the school. Like planned and built, but never executed properly due to the budget, and the ducts had been the old ducts for maintenance of water and sewage pipes. So exciting, but in the end just a budget-cut nuclear shelter with closets, blankets, tables, and a little kitchenware of military origin. But holy crap did we feel like Indiana Jones at that moment. What jobs are you finding it impossible to hire people for, and why? The company I work for is hemorrhaging employees. We caption phone calls for people who've lost their hearing. It requires 2 weeks of training, honestly it should be 3, and it's a skill that doesn't come easily, but nearly everyone is capable of picking it up. We sit in cubicles and don't interact with anyone, we just listen and caption. They'll basically take anyone over 18. It was a good job when I started a few years ago. The time between calls was enough to study or browse the internet, the pay was pretty fair. Now the idle times have fallen dramatically and the pay hasn't changed one bit. Meanwhile, similar call center jobs are paying more just to read from a script. People quickly get burnt out and they quit. The department in charge of scheduling is a mess. It's mismanaged to hell, and the employees are even more overworked than the captioners. Interactions with them can be shady as all heck, and they're known to go back on their word about time off and schedule changes. They did an employee morale survey just yesterday, and I tore them apart. My sister worked here too for over a year and quit today after being very honest in her own survey. As a night shift employee, my pay is higher and my workload is less, so I'm still doing okay here and I actually like the job. But the day shift is a joke and they'll have to change real quick if they want to continue. As it is, they completely deserve to be struggling like this. The company I work for has been trying to fill a dispatcher position for a year and a half now, part-time, evening shift. They're not offering competitive pay and everyone is suffering for it. Trying to get someone for $1 over minimum wage for a job that should start a good $5 to $7 an hour more is painful to watch. The people we get are either incompetent or they realize really quickly what the job entails and they book it out of here. It's amazing how it never occurs to some managers to raise the compensation when they're struggling to fill a job. The economist Dean Baker writes a lot about this. Basically, he quips that a lot of managers and business owners who complain about a skills shortage are in fact suffering from a shortage of skills, namely their understanding of basic labor economics. One big problem, and I see it echoed in a lot of the other comments here, is that employers don't want to train. Companies just don't want to invest in their workers anymore. They only want to hire experienced people. They don't want to apprentice, and if they do, they don't want to pay for it. They expect colleges to do all of this for them. What I've found is that college can't fulfill this role, even though colleges sell themselves as if they can. College can only teach you basic hard and maybe some soft skills that can maybe get one's foot in the door. If employers want good employees that will stick around, employers need to be willing to train and pay employees well, even in training, and not dole out crazy or unrealistic workloads or an otherwise toxic environment. Training will make them good, specific to your industry and company, and the pay and positive work environment will help them stay. Seems like everyone here gets this very basic concept apart from the people in charge. The narrator has a feeling that we might be seeing a lot more of this sort of sentiment in the answers to come. The strip mall down the street from my work is having trouble hiring security guards who don't sell smack. I'm laughing imagining an interview. I would like to be a security guard. Great, but you can't sell substances. Oh, screw that. People to work in nursing homes in PT, OT, kitchen, nursing staff. I don't know if it's just the company that's having issues. 2 of our facilities are having staffing issues, but we're constantly understaffed and getting overworked to the point where more people are leaving because they're overworked. Management keeps saying nobody's applying, but I don't think they're offering people enough to stay or want to work here. Yep, CNA here. Caregiving jobs are one of the most underpaid professions for what we do. They're understaffed at almost every facility I've ever seen. We have a freaking demanding job. Physically, mentally, emotionally. We wipe butts, clean up all the bodily fluids you can think of, get physically and verbally attacked all the time. We run ourselves ragged on huge assignments, barely get 2 minutes to go to the bathroom sometimes, or sometimes not at all. We get close with our residents and patients, and we bathe them and hold their hands and laugh with them. We're with them when they have birthdays and when they're sick and when they die. We become their family when they have none. These should not be barely above minimum wage paying jobs, but they are. The only way to get good workers to come in and stay is to pay them what they deserve. My first job was as a server in a dining room in a nursing home, and this is exactly what happened. Turnover was so high that by the time I'd been there for 4 months, I was the experienced one. Wound up leaving because we were so understaffed and I was the only one available. I was flunking 2 classes and had to leave to save my grades. Construction manager here. The demand for construction is here, but the workers left during the recession and don't want to come back to repeat history. I'm in this boat. I worked for 12 years as a carpenter and I loved it. Work fell off in 2009. Held on as long as I could, lost my business and my house. Gained 2 kids. Went back to school in 2011 to support the fam. Now I work in IT. No way I'm giving up this salary and benefits. I miss construction so badly though. Despite what employers will say, all jobs are fillable if you pay enough money. There was a CEO a few years ago who wrote in complaining that he couldn't hire welders, and it turns out they were offering $20 an hour. That's a quarter of the going rate for welders, by the way. Keep this in mind when a CEO says, "I can't find good workers." The left-off piece is always, "at the rate I'm willing to pay." My valet company is having an incredibly hard time filling supervisor positions at locations that are slow, and you don't do anything for 12 hours. It's paid $15 per hour. Though part of the reason why it's hard is because they want these people to be educated for some reason. EMTs and paramedics. I've been in the position to hire them, and I can't get anyone, and I know exactly why. Hours. Standard week for EMS is 60 to 100 hours. Many EMTs and medics work more than 24-hour shifts sometimes. The pay is terrible. I have over a decade of experience. I have ACLs, PALs, PHTLs, ITLs, ATLs, and about a ton more Ls, and I can hardly score more than $15 an hour here. Injuries. The work is backbreaking. Lifting people that are 500 plus pounds and the 90-pound cot is a great way to get a hernia. And that 500-pound person you had to drag out of a bathroom. Psychological issues are very common on the job, and the list goes on. It's no surprise people avoid EMS like the plague. Anyone want to be a school bus driver? Good. Do you have a valid CDL? Any DUIs? Criminal record? Oh, okay, never mind. Literally anyone, please. I worked as a school bus driver in a Midwestern state. Got paid just over $100 a day, and I worked about 5 hours a day total. Sounds pretty great, but you only work 180 days per year. Production line worker. No education needed, not dangerous, can listen to music while you work 9 to 5 Mondays through Fridays. $15 an hour starting. They call them unicorns for a reason, but people with both programming and design skills. They're few and far between, but it's pretty much an instant hire if you have both. They really help to bridge the gap between dev and design teams and are almost always in demand. My hospital has a hard time finding nursing assistants. Who knew it would be hard to find people willing to wipe butts for no money? Housekeeping at my hotel. Nobody wants to clean up after the nastiest animals on the planet. Plenty of hours and reliable work to be had, but nobody wants to do it. They should be paid more, I guess. Or people could just be less disgusting. Based on the job ads I've seen, I think they're having a little trouble filling the entry-level 3 to 5 years experience jobs. No, I'm not just playing off the meme. These postings were the bane of my existence when I was job hunting. You should apply anyway. HR always puts that in. As far as I know, it's industry best practice. 2 years ago, I was sent a job posting that needed 5 years experience with Server 2012. My inexperienced friend has that job now. Where the frick are you people posting your jobs? Because I've never seen openings for any of this crap. Well, truck drivers. Most of the people on the road are in their 50s or 60s. They're starting to retire or die. It's even hard to find contract drivers to help on busy delivery days. Just because billion-dollar trucking companies might get automated in the next 20 years, it doesn't mean most companies can or will. That doesn't even touch on the inevitable regulations by the DOT, which will almost certainly require a human hand behind the wheel in the case of an emergency. On top of that, you'll have CDL even if automation does take over. That alone will net you decent-paying jobs relative to other jobs that don't require a college degree. This writer makes a very good point. They'll need someone there as a fallback, and they'll likely end up doing a fair bit of work anyway. Although sitting in a somewhat automated vehicle might mean a wage reduction in the short term, if enough of those people strike when it happens, hopefully eventually it'll balance out. Engineers in general, but specifically structural engineers for aircraft, is always hiring somewhere. A third of the industry could retire any day now. Lead and management roles are aplenty. The job requires keen problem solving and math. Typically, employers want people with high GPAs if right out of college. This is a field where all the bullcrap math and problem solving you did in college matters, and you start to realize that you didn't even scratch the surface of analysis there. The biggest issue is that tons of people are believing the crap that they need a master's to improve job prospects, and all of my bosses pretty much agree that they'd rather 2 years of experience than a master's. Experience is everything in this field, seeing different structures, different problems, different airframes, and tons of ways to solve problems, and pretty much most of the industry has under 10 years of experience. The place I work can't frickin' retain good employees because they work us to death. I make over $50K a year in construction, and these buttholes work us to the bone. They've been in the business, it's a franchise, for over 30 years, and I think they have 3 people that have been there longer than 5 years. In the 2 years that I've worked there, they've gone through damn near 10 or 12 people on my side of the job, and probably 6 people in the office. My buddy is putting in his 2 weeks' notice tomorrow. I frickin' hate it there. I've reached the point where I just don't want to do crap for this company because it's all take on their end. Anyways, construction. They train, still can't retain employees. Dog groomer. On average, they make $600 to $700 per week, but to find one is impossible, let alone one that can groom and manage to be the salon manager. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. In New Zealand, we have a huge shortage of competent, qualified carpenters and heavy truck drivers. Funny that it's the older type of trades, it's like they've fallen out of fashion. Mate, they're all doing scaffolding in Australia at the moment. In my experience of heavy truck drivers in New Zealand, there's a high turnaround due to overwork, exhaustion, and being treated like cattle. 70-hour weeks enforced whenever you're in contract breach or no hours. Some sectors are very competitive within themselves to get on site first, to deliver the most loads, to get the best payload. This is a real issue in logging, and drivers often bounce between companies because they get so mad at one that they leave, but then they don't have anything else to fall back on. Trucker rage is not pretty. I've seen fights, logs all over roads, trucks down ravines, air rescue. Truck driving is stressful. It doesn't pay that well unless you own the truck. It means early starts, sometimes being away from family, and all this to be treated like a non-person. My source? I worked in logging logistics, trained others in logistics, and then ran a specialized division of a general freight company for transport logistics. I've noticed that restaurants have a tough time getting servers and cooks, and the food is getting bad at mid-range restaurants and customer service is horrible. And it's pretty simple why. Making food tends to be pretty nasty. The business is run on slim margins, because of rent, power, ingredients and stuff, and the only one that they can really cut costs on is labor. At least in America, the minimum wage is pretty far below the poverty line, but even high-class, expensive places might only pay a few bucks over that for entry-level positions. And chefs, managers and stuff don't tend to move around much, which means you're pretty much stuck there until someone quits. Now, unlike a monarchy, things actually get worse as you go up the food chain. Your pay goes up linearly, but your responsibility doubles or more. If any dish ever goes out wrong, it's on you. If something isn't prepped, you're going to have to do it. Now, waitstaff tend to make more than kitchen staff for less work, mostly because of how tips work in the US. However, waitstaff aren't stuck at crappy places like the cooks are. If you've waited once, you can wait anywhere, but if you don't know a kitchen's layout or rules, you're not going to accomplish much as a chef. In short, once a restaurant stops being an above-average place to work, the good waitstaff leave. The entry-level people stop joining, kitchens tend to have insane turnover, and the whole thing can pretty quickly go to crap. Programmers for industrial environments. It's incredibly hard finding PLCs and robotics programmers that want to get their hands dirty with bigger, complex industrial machinery. It seems counterintuitive, but the problem is most kids just want to do desk programming or handheld electronics, apps for phones or tablets, Windows or Mac, working on PCs or the like, drones, toys, little things. I'm not saying pure software programming isn't satisfying, but seeing machines moving that weigh 10 tons and are the size of rooms because of something you programmed is unbeatable. Teaching jobs. At my school, we've had multiple teachers quit throughout the year and could never replace them, so we just replaced the class. One of our foreign language teachers quit, so they just forced all the students to take French instead, with every class having at least 35 students. I just looked a few minutes ago and we still have more than 10 positions open for the next school year, which starts in 3 weeks. Nurses. Huge supply and demand problem here in the UK. I've also heard there's a huge shortage of teachers in the UK too. These comments were, interestingly enough, written well before the pandemic, which would see immense challenges leveled at both of these professions. As someone who's visited that country a lot, I've always said it's nothing short of miraculous how good the National Health Service is despite how awfully it's kicked about by the various governments in the last few decades. Let's pay them with more than claps. Louisville, Kentucky is a foodie paradise, but there's currently a shortage of restaurant workers. One restaurant group spokesman was in the newspaper as saying something like, "My line cooks can make $17 an hour and I don't have a shortage of workers. Maybe these businesses complaining should take a look at their low wages." I literally went to his restaurant because of that quote. I support common sense. There's a restaurant near me that will tell their workers they'll start at $10 an hour, and then after 2 weeks of working there, they'll get a paycheck that's them being paid minimum wage. When the workers get angry, rightfully so, and ask the managers why they aren't making $10 an hour like they were promised, he'll say, "You have to earn that and show me you're worth $10 an hour." That manager can't seem to understand why people walk out mid-shift with 300 chicken breasts left to pound out. "It's perfectly simple to get a job at my company. I just need someone with the wisdom of a 50-year-old, the experience of a 40-year-old, the drive of a 30-year-old, and the pay scale of a 20-year-old. Also, 25 years experience for an entry-level position that will require 17 obscure certificates, a security clearance that we won't sponsor, and a lie detector test. Thank you." My former landlady works in HR for a recruiting firm. She found on multiple occasions that she had to hire people whose interviews were train wrecks and had huge red flags, like large gaps in the work history, talking like 6 to 10 years, no kids, as well as one that had a major problem with a former employee, all because they were fluently bilingual in English and French. These were mainly call center type jobs, sales development type things, not the funnest work, but if you speak French and you need a job, you can find one in southern Ontario. I work at a school for gifted children, and it's incredibly difficult to find a good defense against the dark arts teacher, let alone retain one for more than a year. Yeah, try telling most of these jobs you're a felon and watch them glaze over. It doesn't matter how back on track your life is. Sometimes it doesn't matter how long it's been. I'm employed by a small business simply because nobody else wanted me. The upside? My employer has me on his side through and through. There's something to be said for a guy that hears me out, doesn't judge, and offers me a job. Does it pay the best? No. However, it does pay me enough to help me keep building my life. It's flexible and doesn't demand the frickin' universe out of me while paying jack. Looking at you, food service. You want good candidates. Sometimes, just maybe, good people have skeletons. I'm not an employer, but I work in the AG industry, mostly in packing facilities as an inspector. They never have enough labor. They're always hiring no matter who you are. They don't test for substances, and it's damn near impossible to get fired unless you mess up real bad. Like getting in a physical confrontation with the supervisor bad. And even then the same people will be back next year. I worked in a vegetable cannery for 2 summers. If you don't mind monotony and being alone with your thoughts for 8 hours, it's pretty nice work with reliable hours. You meet quite a colorful group of characters doing factory work. The only person I know who got fired stole a 50-pound bucket of strawberries and was told to never come back. More than 10 years as a headhunter here. If the job pays less than $15 an hour, it will be hard to find talent that will accept that pay rate and not have red flags like large unexplained gaps in unemployment, major spelling errors on their resumes, or even cursing in the interview with me. Seriously, not appropriate for any industry. Once you can pay about $35K or more, the talent pool starts to open up significantly, and you can start seeing more stable work history, good communication skills, and brick-and-mortar college degrees. In short, low-paying jobs are tough to hire for, and applicants applying to them don't care much. Those roles are abundant and easy to get since no one else applies. Basic retail person for specialty chocolate shop. I'm just baffled at how hard it is to get someone for this job. We pay more than most retail jobs in the area. It's the easiest retail job I've ever worked. Customers are 90% nice because who gets nasty about chocolate? We'll teach you everything. You get to dip things in chocolate and make fudge and take home mistakes. We give you free chocolate. I can't even get people in to interview. Out of 20 calls I made last week, I've been trying to hire since March, 5 were the wrong number or out of order, 10 were voicemails that never called back, and 5 were interviews that just never showed up. It's been months of this. What the frick? Not an employer, but accountants. More specifically, CPAs. Sure, there's a lot of us, but the companies I've worked for all have trouble filling open positions. Most use recruiters who charge a month of the position's salary if the person gets hired. Basically, it's a case of demand being much higher than supply. That's probably why my accounting graduating class had a 99% job placement before graduation. I haven't seen web developers or programmers or software engineers yet. Lots of good coders out there, but open seats want client-facing, full-stack, MVC, Angular, Sitefinity, MonGodb, Swift, and a glittery unicorn. Tenors who can sight read and sing in tune for paid positions in professional vocal ensembles. I wonder if there's a greater or lesser supply of these than in the mid-20th century, to be honest. It feels like younger people in choir, musical, and orchestral pursuits are just much fewer and further between in modern times? Or is the talent pool just that good at honing in on the best jobs? While more and more people are realizing how awesome getting into coding and programming can be, there seems to be a significant lack of individuals who are capable of critical thinking on top of programming. You'd think the two would go hand in hand, but they don't. Alright, so a lot of people are asking me about coding and being taught and stuff. The best way to code is to be a self-starter. Pick a language, grab a book or 3, and work through them. As with any skill, with enough practice you can master it, and coders come from a wide variety of backgrounds. Almost every secondary part of SKEET, skill, knowledge, expertise, education, training, can come into play when you code, from having an artistic background to theatrical arts to physics or math. The first coding language isn't relevant. Almost every language has a syntax that's fairly similar. While there are obviously differences between the languages, that's why they're different, learning one can lead to picking up others very quickly. Study. This is not a walk in the park per se, but with dedication you can do it. There's a bunch of great online tools to get you started. Critical thinking. Thinking critically isn't just about your ability to use logic. Logic and programming flow fairly naturally together. However, thinking critically is nuanced, and every role will force you to think differently each time. Problem solving is huge, time management is huge, and putting those together is massive. It's more important to fix this bug than it is to develop this feature, stuff like that. Pluggers. There are many jobs where I can just code without having to think, say a lot of people. Sure, we call those pluggers because they just plug away. Plugging can be useful, and they have a role, but it's usually not what we hire, as we want individuals who have their own thoughts and who push back on ideas and come up with their own. I would also suggest that this would get very boring for the plugger, but everyone has their own tastes and what they can or can't handle. And jobs? I'm getting a lot of questions on how do I get into a role like that? Do your own apps, build your own ideas, and again, open source projects. Join projects others are in that are open source, contribute and get feedback. Read books on critical thinking and common problems in software. Thinking Fast and Slow is a great example of a book I'd suggest anyone read. How did you get below rock bottom and then make your big comeback? My very first semester of college, I got pneumonia for the first few weeks. A week after that, I got a yeast infection, a very painful one too. Then I fractured my wrist a few weeks after that. Then, after I'd been home for Thanksgiving for a week and had to go back and finish the last 2 weeks of the semester, I thought, well, can't get any worse, and I was hit by a car a week later. Going into my last year of college, had some troubles with mental health after all that, but I'm figuring it out and I'm happy with where I am currently. My older brother passed away shortly after I found out I was cheated on by my girlfriend. All while I was homeless and slowly losing the use of my left leg due to illness. Then I got the news my innocent, autistic little brother got cancer. He's been in remission for a while now. Current biggest worry is about Batman or something. He's a great kid. I quit smoking cigarettes, green herb, and taking oxy at the same time cold turkey with no help. My mental health deteriorated pretty fast. I felt like I really lost my mind for good. Took me a year to recover and feel relatively normal again. Every month that goes by from then, I feel better and better. Time was needed, I guess, for my brain's chemistry to balance. I still have the occasional craving for cigarettes. Not enough to restart, but when I see people enjoy their smoke, I sometimes feel so much envy. I don't miss the oxys at all, though. That crap is dangerous, and I'm happy that I stopped. I was homeless at age 18. I went to a homeless shelter despite warnings from some shady-looking guy. I got treated like crap, made fun of and belittled, and had my backpack with all of my important documents stolen. All this was by the shelter staff, by the way, the people who were supposed to help. I still don't donate to any homeless shelter. You don't know how they're really like until they're your last hope. After that, I sold my cell phone, bought a tent, found a backpack in a garbage can that reeked like cat pee, but was otherwise clean, and did my best to not starve while going from place to place. My tent got stolen eventually, but luckily nobody took the backpack. I also got a revolver at one point. I recovered by getting unbelievably lucky and having my uncle find me and take me in and even give me one of his old properties in exchange for fixing it up real nice so he could sell it when he retires. If it hadn't been for that, I would have self-deleted after that first snowfall. I was even saving a bullet for it. My girlfriend left me for my best friend. Then they kicked me out of the house that I was paying rent for. Turns out I was never added to the lease. Then they all stole my stuff by not allowing me near the house. I became homeless with just the clothes on my back. I was sick too. It was great. I worked my butt off to get an apartment, go to college with no student loans, and get a good job. This is definitely going to be one of those check your privilege videos for some of you, and for the narrator as well. I've been desperately poor and nearly thrown out of housing before, but never crossed over that line to homelessness. I guess there's still time though. Well done for getting back on your feet, commenter. I was sick of my job, and one of the few redeeming features, my closest work colleague, who worked for me in a team of 2, left. For entirely unrelated reasons to me. We're still friends. After a long time just feeling very alone, I split up with my long-term ex, who owned the house we both paid towards, and I moved out. Moved into the only flat I could afford in a quiet street, where nobody would really know if I was coming and going or not. Literal assets to my name at that point were a car, a handful of personal possessions. I took out a loan to buy the most basic furniture and appliances. Kept everything extremely basic, hoping to move out ASAP. I'm an absolute introvert, no friends. I perform the bare minimum for family to stop them moaning, but otherwise I keep away from them all. I can easily go a year without seeing anyone outside of work. I don't even know the neighbors' names, but they complained several times when I first moved in about all kinds of made-up crap. Turned out that after bills and things, I had a pittance of money each month to do anything with, and nothing approaching luxury. Minimal shopping for food, clothes, and stuff for months on end. I kept the new address from everyone for as long as possible, even my employer, deliberately. I figured it would take several weeks for anyone to find me, and if it did it at the right time of year, it would only be my employer who'd notice I wasn't there first, and then try to trace back, which would be tricky without police help. Started writing something to explain it all, and at the bottom of the page I had a set of boxes for all the people I wanted to say something to. After a few months of trying to finish it, there was still nothing in any of the boxes. It was a small list of names of people who might notice and might be a little sad, but nothing in particular to say to them. I deliberately started spending time with those people, in case it was the last, and even found myself leaving them on, well, not quite a speech, but saying something they'd be likely to remember if they didn't see me again afterwards. But I worded it so it wasn't seeming unusual at the time. Which worked, by the way, nobody ever suspected. A year later, I'm still there. Not quite as rock bottom as I was then, but not much better. Made a set of deadlines for if it's not improved by X date for when I finished paying for certain things, and having some spare money. I had a couple of little free, cheap holidays with some of the people on the list. Again, always thinking, in case that's the last time, because I don't see those people that often. A 3-week vodka binge. I woke up in the hospital in restraints. It could only get better, to be honest. My girlfriend cheated on me, my uncle died in a house fire on Christmas, my cousin was shot 30-something times because he was in psychosis and tried to take a car, I watched my grandpa slowly wither away from a rare disease in his abdomen, failed all 5 classes that college semester, tried to end things but couldn't figure out how I'd self-delete, so that ex that cheated on me called the police, so I got charged for having alcohol. There was no miracle turnaround in the end, but I'm getting back to normal slowly but surely. I tried to not be alive anymore. I got caught at the right time by my mum. She broke down, told me it was all my fault and I was shaming the family name by taking the easy way out. I ended up staying at the hospital longer than necessary because my mum needed an excuse. I started planning elaborate ways to no longer be among the living and making it look like an accident or from a disease, an end that won't shame my family. I caught a bad case of tuberculosis. Laying in bed, I got a deliriously good idea. Start throwing up whatever I eat or drink. Take meds on an empty stomach. Take extra pills or take no meds. Having a weak stomach, now I'm coughing up fresh blood in the bathroom or wherever. I hide them away. Say that I'm taking my meds, nobody figures out. Go to bed one night, wake up in the hospital. I'm too weak to speak. I can't make much sense, but I somehow feel disappointed. I see my best friend beside my bed. She's crying her eyes out. Sees me, still crying. She says she knew I'll survive battling this disease. She says she wouldn't know what to do if I died. Continued to say many things that I've forgotten about. I feel like I've betrayed her. I'm crying with her. Long story short, I crawled out of the basement of rock bottom thanks to my best friend. Mine's still ongoing, but I overcame a substance addiction and major depression and found my dream job. Well, old mistakes came back to haunt me and led to an arrest and 1 month in jail after having had a baby 3 months prior. I was facing years in prison for a first-time offense when I got home to find out my dear husband had cheated while I was locked up. Then I lost my home and struggled to find work when I'd previously been able to find really good jobs. I'm finally working, but definitely not my ideal choice, and I'm still dealing with my case. I'm still hoping to recover from it all. I went to my dealer's house to score some smack. He lived in the basement of his grandma's place. Her entire place was decorated in pure white frilly pillows with Jesus' face on them. I hadn't gone twosies in like 3 days, and while we were waiting for this guy to arrive, we smoked a cig, which loosened up my bowels nicely. I took a number 2 in his grandma's bathroom, and in my borderline withdrawal stupor, I didn't realize that the toilet hadn't flushed completely. Flash forward a half hour to when the good stuff arrives, and we both get higher than God's left testy. I always smoked my smack off tinfoil, and it always made me throw up. So, I stumble my way back to the Lutheran toilet and yak my brains out. I go to flush, and it's clogged. But I'm gawked to high heaven, so I figure if I just flush again, it'll go down, right? Nope, not right. Anyway, I flushed like 3 extra times, and then it all came right back up. So my friend hears what's happening and comes running up to see what's wrong while I'm standing on the edge of the tub, while everything that had been in my stomach for the last 3 years came raging up out of the toilet. He started screaming that he's going to kill me, and I'm pulling a bunch of white, lacy towels off Grandma's bathroom wall. In the end, I used 6 or 7 towels, all with angels or Jesus' faces on them, to soak up my mess. I didn't quit using substances for another couple of months, but I never saw the aforementioned dealer again. It was definitely the lowest point of my life. In short, I flooded my dealer's grandma's bathroom and had to use her Jesus-approved towels to clean everything up. Yep, that's a definite low point. That poor old lady. I'd be fairly sure that you either got your dealer thrown out of her place, or saw him in some pretty hot water afterwards for a while. Maybe you even had the knock-on effect of making him reconsider his life choices, but I guess I shouldn't hold my breath. My daughter went into sudden respiratory arrest when she was 2 months old. Day 9 of ICU, I got a call that my older 3 kids were in a bad car accident with their dad, and I don't know if they're okay. Fortunately, they walked away with only mild concussions, and my baby is preparing herself for kindergarten and as healthy as can be. I'm so lucky and blessed. About 7 years ago, I went to get £10 out of the cash machine to buy a train ticket home, and I couldn't. I had no money. I know that's not that bad, things could be worse, but that's the only time in my life I've had 0 money, and I felt awful. Luckily, a great man at work loaned me £100 and wouldn't even let me pay it back when I tried to. So, I got 3 misdemeanors and became homeless. Figured that was rock bottom. Had an upswing, got married, only to go to a festival and acquire medication-resistant skin mites. Took several years to get rid of them. They also left me with a residual skin condition that seems permanent, that doctors don't understand and can't treat. You don't really recover from stuff like this. What I did do was learn to compartmentalize my feelings, learn a ton of self-discipline, and become a way stronger person. Now I'm a full-fledged adult with a skin condition who's recently picked up painting again, has started writing, and is learning coding. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. After my stepdad passed away, I didn't really see my mum for 3 out of the 4 years I was in high school. 2 years I lived with her, she'd take off for weeks sometimes with no warning, and the other 2 I got passed to various family. When I was 19, I was supposed to finally move back with her when last minute she sent me to live with an aunt. The aunt's husband just opened a bakery, so I worked in the bakery doing cashier, stocking the front, dishes, making the coffee, cleaning the front entirely, and frosting the donuts. He did nothing except bake. I worked 70 hours a week from 3 a.m. to as late as 6 p.m. Monday through Friday and worked blockbuster 2 of those days until 10:30. I was sleeping 3 hours or less most nights and he'd pay me approximately $1 an hour as payment for me living with them. I slept on their couch and had only a week or 2 worth of clothes with me. Eventually, my body started not being able to keep up the pace, and in the 3rd month when I pointed out the sink was leaking, he asked me why everything broke around me and why I was so useless. I responded with, I don't know, maybe it's the same reason you're a butthole. So I got kicked out and I took months to recover because I was anemic and seriously exhausted. I ended up living with a friend, but I didn't make a lot, so I was living off noodles, water, and rice for months. In that time, I started dating a guy who ended up treating me really badly, and when I finally got the courage to break it off, he stalked me at work. The cherry on top was my estranged dad and I had started trying to build a relationship again, and he emailed me that I wasn't even his and I was the reason that my parents divorced. I did move back with my mum after that, and our relationship fell apart at the news that I knew about my dad because she thought I should hate her, and I didn't. She'd pick fights so bad I'd get bouts of IBS and have to miss work because I'd throw up for 6 hours so violently I'd pull muscles in my back, abdomen, and neck. At that point, I worked full-time and paid $600 rent to my mum for a 10x10 room with no privacy whatsoever. I'd never had a substance use issue, but she'd barge in without knocking just because she could. I wanted to throw myself in front of the train every day on the way home from work so I wouldn't have to go back to my mum's. Eventually, I had friends who knew I was doing badly, and it was getting scary, and they offered to let me move in with them. I cried and said yes. They helped me get my license and my first car. My mum and I since have mended our relationship after years of talking about it, and she finally understands more about how I felt. My aunt divorced her horrible baker husband, the bakery failed because he was lazy and didn't have people skills, and I'm doing much better now and have a much stronger support system. I just started therapy again. I even have a boyfriend who I've been with for 7 years who stuck by me while I worked through my trauma and issues with my past mistreatment by others. I still have a rough time, but I'm glad I'm still here. I was homeless when I came out of rehab, then I spent 6 months in a halfway house. I worked pretty hard to get a 1-bedroom in a share house in the city near me. While living with a group of strangers my age, I had a massive relapse and psychological episode which led to my telling of horrific and manipulative lies. Ultimately, I ended up in ICU for 6 days with internal bleeding. After quickly having to look for a new place, I checked into an intensive outpatient clinic that had a strong focus on dual diagnosis and therapy over the AA God model. It took years of continued treatment to get me properly medicated and as healthy as possible. It's still an ongoing battle, but I have much better tools. I remember sitting in my bedroom at 2 a.m. trying to make myself start the 10-page research paper due the next day and just feeling like life was impossible. I remember looking around the room for something to end things with. This was while I was on antidepressants, by the way. Somehow I managed to not end things then and there, but instead stumble into my roommate's room, wake him up and ask for help. I then lost control and started wailing and crying. He handled things surprisingly well. He went and talked to my professors the next morning and asked them to give me extensions. I ended up failing one of the classes anyway and almost failing the other. After that, everything changed. I learned how to take care of my mental and emotional health and never got to that point again. Later on, when I was doing a lot better, he became pretty depressed himself and would literally spend the entire day in bed. Then it became my job to encourage him and motivate him. He almost slept through a final exam and I convinced the professor to let me leave, go home and wake him up. So I kind of paid him back, I guess. Good on both of you. Friends make all the difference in the darkest periods of our lives. The narrator mentioned before that he was pretty poor and nearly out of home for a while. Well, that might have definitely crossed over the line if I hadn't had such great friends helping me out. Look after your nearest and dearest, folks, because with any luck, they'll do the same for you anyway. Caught my controlling, substance addict boyfriend cheating on me a few nights before we were both supposed to move into a new apartment. He raged and chucked me out of both apartments. I stayed with friends and at shelters while working 3 jobs to get back on my feet. Had a hard time finding housing. I was struggling with PTSD because not only did he turn on me, the entire community I'd built in the time I was with him did too. Even my own friends. Women were coming to me for months afterwards with confessions. I was also trying to stay sober during this time. I had nobody, was estranged from my family, wanted to just not be alive anymore. Eventually, I found housing with one of my remaining friends. I adopted a cat and worked really hard to replace all my furniture. The apartment was crap, but it was the first place I'd felt safe in years. Fast forward 2 years, I'm still working a lot, but I live in a much nicer place now. I have better friends and don't suffer with PTSD so much. My ex's actions still haunt me, but I'm a lot stronger and trust myself and my instincts more now. And I'm still sober. My husband lost his job and insurance. I kid you not, the very next day he broke a rib and had to go to the ER because he didn't know what had happened. Apparently, you can break your rib by sneezing really hard. 2 days later, I had to go to the ER for a kidney stone myself. The ER thought I was seeking addictive painkillers because we'd just been there with my husband, even though that first time we'd refused medication because he didn't want it. So they sent me home. Of course, this wasn't free, and they were really mean about it while I was trying to take severe pain like a champ and not cry because no one believed me. The next day, I'd thrown up so much from the pain that I'd damaged my esophagus and started throwing up blood as well. My throat felt like it was on fire and I couldn't breathe properly. We Googled it and every website said, "Get your butt to the ER," so we reluctantly went back. I won't go into that experience, but we basically had to beg the staff to see me after I'd laid on the floor outside the triage, in and out of consciousness for 6 hours. After they finally told me what had happened, they sent me home. I was still chucking up blood and in horrible pain from the kidney stone. It didn't get better. I didn't want to go back to the hospital after they'd failed to help me twice in the same week, so I went to urgent care instead. They said they weren't equipped to deal with my problem, but I told them what the hospital had done and begged them to try. They gave me an IV, pain medication, anti-nausea medicine, and a couple of other things, and frickin' finally, I was able to go home and recover. And then the hospital bills started coming. The hospital didn't do anything to help my problem, but 5 years later, I'm still paying for it. I can't remember how much it cost because it came as a series of separate bills, but probably about as much as our house all said. In short, got real sick the day after our health insurance expired, still paying for it. Proud to be an American. It was the depth of my eating disorder after starting a really crappy internship in the worst apartment I've ever been in. My landlord was a smackhead who wanted me to sleep with his friends. My roommates were 2 much older, creepy men. My workplace often had fires on the warehouse floors and didn't refill their fire extinguishers. And to top it off, I was going through withdrawal from my depression meds because my psychiatrist refused to do anything but raise my dosage when they didn't work, which was always. And my parents said I was slurring words now. The basement of rock bottom was staring at every single one of my ribs in the mirror in that crap hole, having not eaten for 4 days and being dizzy from withdrawal, crying because I knew I was worthless and still needed to be thinner. How did I get out of it? Time and luck. I started forcing myself to eat something every day. I left my job a month early to spend time with my friends and family. Got a prescription for a different medication and started that. Went to a cabin with my best friends and focused on nothing but having a good time for a week. Moved from that sketchy apartment, started university again, and had to eat to think. Relapsed a bit along the way, but I finished the term. Then I started a new internship and discovered a group of people and an industry that I loved. And after 4 attempts, I finally found a therapist that I clicked with and have been working through my issues with since. I'm not out of the woodwork yet, I don't know if I'll ever be, but I'm at the edge looking out, and that's so much better than I ever imagined. Just over 5 years ago, I was homeless, in active addiction, and others were deciding if I should go to prison. Then the universe decided to show me that hell does in fact get deeper, and took my fiancé from me when he took too many substances. I decided I had no idea how to live life and started taking advice. I let other people help, no matter how much I hated their solutions. I went to treatment, did what was suggested, I got clean, and slowly, very slowly, learned how to take responsibility for myself. I started making the right choices no matter how hard they were. Today, I have the career I always wanted with money in the bank. I'm married to the love of my life and our relationship is better than I ever knew was possible. We have a beautiful 6-month-old baby boy who has my blue eyes. Friday, we bought a house that we're in love with. If your life is a mess, it's probably not everyone else's fault. You should probably stop thinking you have the answers. Let go of the past and take responsibility for yourself. No matter what's happened to you in the past, it's still your life to live and you are responsible for it. Believe in yourself because your belief is the only one that can change your life. First, my dad died. Next, I learned my girlfriend cheated on me while I was at his funeral. Then I was on the verge of flunking out of college. Then my mum was falling so deep into depression, and my sister thought she might self-delete. The only reason I can explain how I got out of this depressing circle of hell was to just buck up. Nobody's going to help you. You need to find your own way out and put the pieces back together the best way you can. What's the most interesting mental disorder you've come across? Medical doctor here, neurologist. Capgras delusion. The patient is convinced that a family member has been replaced by an imposter who's completely identical. For example, the patient will tell you the person sitting across from them looks exactly like their spouse, sounds exactly like their spouse, has all the memories of their spouse, but that's not actually my spouse. And the patient oftentimes isn't overly distressed by this imposter. In 20 years, I've only seen this condition twice. I was also going to write about Capgras delusion. I had a case a few years ago. In this instance, it was a mother who was under the false belief that her son was a clone. We had some success with atypical antipsychotics, and I helped her focus her energy on being a good mother to the kid, whether it was hers or not, because she could agree that the child was innocent and needed a loving home. Family support was also crucial. A psychologist here, not someone I worked with, but I did observe someone with alien hand syndrome. The patient's left hand would stroke her hair and pat her face, but was not under her control. Each episode would last about 20 minutes. Turned out the cause was a tumor. Amazingly, it didn't seem to cause her any distress. I once worked with a guy whose voices were positive, like a cheer squad. So instead of, "You're useless, no one likes you," his voices said, "You look amazing today. People think you're charming and funny." It wasn't great though, despite what you'd think. He has enough insight to understand that they were as much a hallucination as if they were giving negative messages, and he felt this crushing, overwhelming pressure that he couldn't live up to the incredibly high standards set by his voices. It was quite crippling for him, really. As much as, if not more so, than if the voices were negative or even benign. Foreign accent syndrome is rare, but absolutely fascinating. Yes, my parents have a friend, Native American, never left Canada. Got into a bad fight one night and got her head rocked pretty badly and was knocked out. When she regained consciousness, she had an English accent, and to this day she still has it. I know a lady who hit her head while using a trampoline and started talking with a deep German accent. She still has the accent, but went to a speech specialist to learn how to speak with an American accent to get her old voice back. Maybe if I knock my head hard enough, I can get an accent that will stop confusing our viewers as to where I come from. It's tempting, but I also like having brain cells, so I'll hold off for now. Mental health counselor here. The interesting one is schizophrenia with visual hallucinations. Most people with schizophrenia have auditory hallucinations. I didn't realize how much more unsettling the visual ones were. The client I had with this disorder used to see me and other people he knew. He called me up once, yelling at me for coming into his apartment early in the morning. Even if I told him otherwise, the experience of seeing me is very real to him. I can't imagine seeing people in my own home, especially at night. That would freak me the frick out. Lawyer here, I did about 10 years criminal law. I've had many clients with schizophrenia. Auditory hallucinations must be disconcerting and terrifying. Visual would also be awful, but the oddest one I've come across was olfactory delusions. Client who had a psychotic break and had a range of hallucinations telling her to hire a car and drive across the country ASAP. She was arrested doing 180 kilometers an hour through a country town. The speed limit was 60, on a major highway. When I came down to see her, she was obviously unwell, but she also kept sniffing my hand anytime I asked her a question. Later, when she was well again, she explained it to me. She remembered everything, even though she had no history of mental illness prior to this time. Everyone bad, i.e. all of the police officers, smelled like rotting corpses to her at the time, but I knew I could trust you because you smelled like sunshine and flowers. This stopped along with her other hallucinations when she came out of psychosis. I never knew before then that delusional smells were also possible. Early on in my career, I worked at a planned community that functioned as a partial hospitalization program. One of the residents would bring magazines and newspapers he'd found to the main office floor every day. Sometimes he'd be upset, sometimes overjoyed, depending on the stories, because all of them were about him. I've never worked with someone with such delusions before or since. One day he was Michael Jordan offering to buy us cars. The next day he was the leader of the people behind September 11th trying to hide with us. He'd read his obituary, his wife cheated on him in a political scandal, he'd surveyed the Congo. We restricted and sorted his mail after the incident where he thought he was that terror leader, but he'd just find magazines through other residents or in the community. Phantom pregnancies are pretty fascinating. A woman can be so convinced she's preggers that her periods stop, she gets all the classic symptoms, and her belly might even grow. Nobody is totally sure how this happens. It's suspected that Queen Mary Tudor, or Bloody Mary, experienced multiple phantom pregnancies. In one case, she went into confinement at around 8 months and didn't leave until the 11-month mark, when it was clearly obvious there was no baby. It was probably the most humiliating moment of her entire humiliating reign. Her husband abandoned her, both the court and the people she thought she'd lost her mind. Bear in mind that she was likely too old to conceive by the time of her marriage, and her constant illnesses from a very young age over the stress about her mother and a bit about her father. There was no way she would have been able to have a normal pregnancy. Also, share psychosis is pretty crazy. There was a case a few years ago where twin sisters visited each other. One was mentally ill and the other one wasn't. And the ill one went into a psychotic state, and then the healthy twin suddenly, for no reason, went into the same state. They threw themselves into traffic multiple times, getting hit by trucks. After being separated at the hospital, the healthy twin snapped out of her psychosis and was fine. The other one stayed in her psychosis and ended up killing someone with a hammer, and neither of them remembered anything that happened. One of my old friends worked in a care home for people with various severe mental health disorders. One of the clients, lovely guy, pretty easygoing by the standards of that institute, had a rock-solid delusion that he was CEO of the company, and the reason that he was there was some sort of CEO check-in on that specific house. He'd basically gently chastise all the workers for their jobs or congratulate them if they'd done something correct. He'd talk about promoting people, stuff like that. It was always fun to hear the stories about that guy at the end of the day. My mum was losing it towards the end, plus she was finally diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. She also had hallucinations. She was insistent that she worked for the care home she went to before hospice, and she'd tell us that her job was terrible there and didn't pay enough. She thought I was the nurse a couple of times before when she was staying with my brother. We pretty much went with it because it would make her upset if we didn't believe her. So I'd just listen like I was the nurse and then leave the room for a few minutes and come back and suddenly I was her daughter now. She called every nurse with brown hair by my sister's name. The sad part is we learned she had been seriously mentally ill for a very long time. We knew she was untreated for something, but didn't realize how the hallucinations ruled her life. She was paranoid of peeping toms, so my dad would play along because that was likely the easiest way to deal with her. My poor dad. I always expected her to die first, but my dad went before my mum. Hemi-neglect is a pretty interesting one. The affected person just doesn't realize that they have two halves to their body and only take care of one. Shave one side of their face, brush their hair on that side, wash themselves on that side, and the other side basically becomes Dirty Mountain Man. Social worker here, used to work at a psych hospital. Saw a form of OCD where the patient couldn't let go of anything she came across or made. Leaves, sticks, tampons, pads, fecal matter, some stored in Tupperware, some or most hidden where her feet went in her bed. We'd routinely have to go through her room and get everything removed. I don't remember how she did in treatment, but I remember that she was a teenager and I felt terrible that that's what she was dealing with. It seems incredibly unfair that people can just have this sort of condition their entire lives. OCD is treatable, but it seems like compulsions like this would be so hard to break, especially when they're kept hidden by the person doing them like this. Medical doctor here, not a psychiatrist or psychologist, but I did encounter a pretty interesting patient case on my psychiatry rotation when I was in medical school. There was a patient at an inpatient psychiatric facility for self-deleting ideation. During her admission, she constantly insisted that she had a mass in her chest and demanded to be physically examined only by male doctors. When the psychiatrist I was rotating under declined to perform a physical exam, she asked me to do it during my daily patient interview. I also declined the physical exam, but had a bit of a hunch to check her medical records. It turned out that she had an ultrasound done a week before that found only normal tissue without masses. However, apparently this lady had frequented many doctors' offices with various complaints of an unspecific nature and would usually focus on her chest or downstairs area when she visited male physicians' offices. The psychiatrist I was working with diagnosed her with factitious disorder, formerly known as Munchausen syndrome, and also felt that she had a personality disorder. He felt it was a histrionic personality disorder, but also felt it was possibly borderline personality disorder. Definitely cluster B though. It seems her goal was to mostly get attention from medical professionals. She had a lot of issues, but we also had to be careful to make sure she wasn't fishing for a lawsuit. Patients like her are why doctors document everything meticulously, so the patient wouldn't admit to making things up all the time. According to the psychiatrist I was working with, she didn't actually believe any of her health problems existed, and her primary goal was the attention from medical professionals. If she actually believed she was sick, we would have diagnosed her with illness anxiety disorder, commonly known as hypochondria. Medical doctor working in inpatient psychiatric facility. We had a psychotic patient with visual hallucinations who saw colored dots all around him during episodes of distress. The great thing about it was, he told us he was able to blow the colored dots away. We encouraged him to do it as it seemed to greatly reduce his anxiety. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I never saw a patient with it myself, but I'm a nurse, and in the electronic medical world we use walking corpse syndrome. It's always at the top of the diagnosis choice list. Apparently, it's when you're convinced that you're dead. Never understood why it was top of the list. I'm an EMT and I've come across this twice. The first person was oddly pleasant. The second person had hostile tendencies towards people who tried to get them to eat or provide medical care. They'd soil themselves because corpses don't have to go to the bathroom. Mental health counselor here. The most interesting disorder I've ever treated was dissociative amnesia. The guy had big edits out of his life that had him ending up in trouble with his girlfriend, and when I was seeing him was on the border of him getting in trouble with the law. I actually know of someone that suffers from something like this from PTSD. She was in the World Trade Building on September 11th, and she barely escaped before the building she was in collapsed. After that, she acted normal, but her eyes were blank and the way she talked felt pretty forced. Anyways, for about a year after that, she disappeared. Her family thought she was kidnapped because nothing was missing from her home but her car and a few things like some clothes. The police searched but gave up. Her parents had money, so they hired some PIs that ended up finding her a year or two later. She had moved cross-country under a new name. She doesn't remember a thing from right before September 11th until they found her. I haven't talked to my buddy in a couple of years, but last I heard she was making good progress with therapists. She even got married, but never moved back. I have always thought narcissistic personality disorder was fascinating. You have people whose bullcrap is right in front of them and they'll still tell you and truly believe that they haven't done a single thing wrong. I've got a guy now who cheated on his wife and he genuinely doesn't understand why no one trusts him. It's amazing. Dated a woman who wasn't diagnosed, but I suspect she had it too. Gaslighting was real to the degree where I'd only speak with her in writing, even in person, and she'd sit there and say things she wrote weren't actually written. She eventually admitted to gaslighting, so I'm unsure if it could even be considered NPD. She'd violently argue that she did say something she didn't say, or didn't say something she did. Even in writing. We'd both be there looking at what she wrote and she'd deny it. I'd record our verbal conversations and replay things that she'd said. She'd deny saying it even as we heard it. She'd play confused in a conversation and attribute the confusion to a convo to things never said. Literally. We'd review an entire conversation, never find out what she was complaining about, and she'd just break down, cry, and yell. Worst of all, she sent me a message on Ramadan saying, "With Ramadan approaching, if I ever wrong you, please remember you probably deserved it and may Allah forgive you for being annoying." Doctor training to be a psychiatrist here. I had a patient recently who was convinced he had fathered a child. He hadn't. He got in trouble because he'd go to this kid's school to try to contact him. Parents were understandably upset and had never had any contact with the patient previously. The patient believed that Stephen Hawkins had inseminated the mother by some sort of telepathic process he couldn't explain. Truly bizarre, and so far hasn't really gained insight with treatment. He gets very emotional thinking about his son. Still works full-time though, and in many respects leads a normal life. Amazing. Yeah, it's remarkable how, apart from these certain quirks, someone with a disorder is essentially just a normal, flawed person with one blinder or eccentricity in one part of their brain. There are certainly people with mental disorders who've never been diagnosed just because it either hasn't come up in too detrimental a manner or has been repressed by societal norms. I worked as a crisis worker as a behavioral health case manager for a year. There was a client there with intermittent explosive disorder, probably the most interesting client I've ever met. Would, as the diagnosis suggests, explode during an escalation. It was too much for us to handle, and the client ended up getting taken to the hospital. I was a support worker, and one case I had was a boy with pandas syndrome. It basically manifests as severe OCD. It can completely alter the personality of a child. This kid wouldn't leave his room, to the point where he'd just pee on the carpet. He'd scream obscenities to his parents for no reason. This was actually caused by having strep throat, except the bacterial infection didn't go away, and it can turn into pandas. And the treatment is most often just a very specific antibiotic. But the children often need therapy to deal with the aftermath. Their personality goes back to normal, but it's very upsetting to go through. My sister had pandas. The tricky thing with finding out in her case, though, was that before and still she has severe anxiety, oppositional defiance disorder, major depression, and ADHD. Pandas was just increasing the severity of her already existing mental health conditions, and they only wound up figuring it out because of her other rare physical health problems she was experiencing. She did end up returning back to her own unique brand of normal, but it was a pretty hellish thing watching my family struggle until then. Pain conversion disorder. I had an ex-girlfriend that was in a wheelchair, but her parents and doctor said she could walk, but her legs wouldn't let her. Her parents said she might have woken up during a surgery she had when she was a kid, because it all started after that surgery. She even went to physical therapy for it for years, and she might still do that, I don't know, but she couldn't move around without the chair. Kind of, but she couldn't walk. So it was almost a disability, but not fully. Very confusing. She was supermodel hot though, and the coolest girl I've ever dated. I've worked with one client with legit dissociative identity disorder. She reported 6 personalities, but I only ever met 4. I'm worried to find out when the other ones come out. She was actually managing fairly well, but definitely better after some trauma work and a med regime. Still pretty wild when provocative Susie would show up and not normal, straight-up Susan. DID was always interesting to me when I was in medical school because the diagnosis is pretty controversial among psychiatrists. There seemed to be a great rise in diagnoses when it was portrayed more in the media, which points to a social contagion of some sort similar to how self-deletion, eating disorders, and self-scarring are contagious behaviors when exposed to them. I'd wager a good percentage of patients diagnosed with DID actually have borderline personality disorder because of the unstoppable identity those particular patients have. According to my professors in medical school, bipolar patients are particularly vulnerable to social contagions. Selective mutism intrigued me. They have anxiety to the point where they don't speak. Happened to my mother's granddaughter. After my mum died, she drew a painting of my mum, her grandmother, saying how nice she was to her. I wish she was able to say that to her in person. However, the condition is, as I understand, related to an anxiety disorder. Jerusalem syndrome, where a person who visits the Holy Land is convinced they are Jesus. It typically goes away once the person leaves. Maybe every single one of these people with the syndrome was actually possessed by our Lord and Savior. I am joking, but it's interesting that it keeps happening. I knew a guy who claimed to be the Lord for a while. Turns out he's not the Messiah, he's a very naughty boy. I'm a licensed medical psychologist now, but before I went to graduate school, I worked in an inpatient mental health hospital on adult and adolescent units. I'd say the most interesting 2 disorders I've seen are dissociative fugue and conversion disorder. I saw both while I was there. Dissociative fugue is a condition where someone can wake up one day and believe they're a different person for a short time. My experience was a man who woke up and drove his car from his home until it ran out of gas, which happened to be in my city. He had no ID with him, and I don't remember his name, family, or any details of his life. After a short stay in the hospital and some meds, he remembered everything and had a family member pick him up and monitor him for a while. But he still had to put gas in the car, which had been towed to the hospital parking lot. Conversion disorder is characterized by the individual losing the ability to do something, like walking, seeing, or talking, and believing that has a biological component. In reality, it's a response to significant trauma and is dissociative in nature. A woman in the hospital manifested the symptom of losing her ability to walk while she was there. There was no reason as to why she wasn't able to walk. She came in walking, was unable to ambulate while there, and left walking again. My mum had paranoid schizophrenia and would eat Vicks out of the jar to coat her brain so the Protestants couldn't hear her thoughts. She was Catholic. My dad was Protestant and became Catholic to marry her. Hear me out, maybe not the most interesting disorder, but interesting in prevalence is GAD. About 40% of men and 50% of women suffer from it in my office. The Western ideals of hard work, keeping up, pulling non-existent bootstraps is mentally harming everyone. It's a serious frickin' problem that the government and Big Pharma like to profit from. It's interesting because it's so disgusting. Humans aren't designed to be pulled in 30 different directions, but that's what modern society expects, and it's killing us all. My friend has complex regional pain syndrome. She experiences non-psychogenic hallucinations as part of that pathology. She's completely aware that there are hallucinations and has no psychosis. She sees white tigers, angels, and demons. The white tigers apparently have a thick and luxurious fur that's wonderful to touch. It's a horrible condition, but that aspect of it she really likes. Psychiatrist here. One of my most interesting cases was Cotard's syndrome. I was an intern and ended up seeing the patient on the inpatient unit and later in the state hospital. Had the delusion that he was dead. You'd ask him how he was doing and he'd shout, "I'm burning in hell!" My other favorite is a patient who had the delusion of pregnancy and thinks she's pregnant with over 50 babies at the same time. I'm only a psychology student, so I haven't seen any patients yet. But one of the most interesting mental disorders I've studied is prosopagnosia. It's the inability to recognize faces. But the thing that fascinates me the most is the fact that someone with prosopagnosia will be able to recognize others by some distinct characteristics, like a mustache or the voice, and won't be able to recognize them if they shave or don't talk. What's the most obnoxious reason an employee had to GTFO? Had a guy who we hired who showed a lot of potential in sales. He was a little arrogant and had a good-sized ego, but wasn't enough of a problem. He was very good at his job, and eventually it went to his head. He started showing up late all the time, leaving early, cutting corners where he could. The final straw came when he showed up late and someone spoke up to him about it. He decided the best choice of words he could yell were, "I make the most sales and I have the biggest Johnson, so you can all F off." He was fired on the spot. The customers thought it was pretty funny though. In his defense, if he was making more sales with half the amount of time and meeting quotas, I don't know if I would have cared, but I would have fired him for saying that, so whatever. Yeah, we do let something slide when someone's sales are up, but this wasn't something we could excuse. A pawn shop employee stole $400 from the cash register, then realized that there were video cameras. He had no idea where the security footage was stored, so in order to cover his tracks, he set the store on fire. He actually ended up pretty badly burned in the process and went to jail right after the hospital. I used to own a bakery and a woman quit because she blamed her yeast infection on a bad batch of yeast I bought from China. I might be a guy, but I don't think that's how yeast infections work. I think she might have just been trying to get a rise out of you. The company I work for is a contractor for a giant corporation and we go to different stores to do work. This new guy we hired seemed normal at first, but it turned out he was a complete frickin' moron. So, one day he goes on site with one of the senior employees to shadow him. This genius thought that because we worked for a giant corporation, we could just eat anything off the shelves and from the refrigerators for free. Well, the employee saw this and was like, "What the frick are you doing? You need to pay." And the manager comes. This guy then started fighting with the manager, then got in his car afterwards and drove off. Needless to say, his butt was fired the next day. We hired somebody to do video and photo media work. After a certain point, he felt it was selling out and didn't want to do media commercially. He wanted to do business stuff. We asked him which role he'd like. If he picked his role, we'd try it out. If he didn't, he'd quit. He'd decided to quit. He couldn't come up with a role. Medical clinic. An employee told a patient he wants to know what she tastes like. Doesn't get much worse. Not many exit interviews start with, "We really hope that was just you hitting on her, but we're going to inventory the samples just in case." Ugh, I hadn't even thought that the gentleman in question actually does legitimately have the means to consume parts of his patients if that was actually his goal. Gross. I used to manage a store in the mall. One of my employees, I'm pretty sure, was cheating on her husband with a mall security guard. I'd come by on my days off and he'd scurry out in a fluster. I never mentioned it, but the guy was coming by all the time to the point it was keeping her from doing her job. Finally, we had a work meeting and I said in a very non-accusatory way to everyone something like this. "I know it gets slow in here during the week and I'm guilty of it myself, but from now on I need everyone to keep personal visits to a minimum during your lunch break." This one lady stands up and starts screaming at me. How dare I accuse her? I'm a B-word. She quits. She continued to call me and leave me long, aggressive rants on voicemail for a while as well. Tool and die shop owner here. One of our machinists would go out for lunch and slam back 3 or 4 beers every day. When I found out, I told him he can't drink beer at lunch. He said it was his personal time and what he did at lunch was his business, not mine. The next day, he came back from lunch smelling like beer and I let him go on the spot. A few years later, he showed up at my office asking for his old job back. He said he was an alcoholic back then and was sorry for his behavior. He was now sober and needed a job. I hired him on the spot and it worked out great for 5 or 6 years. Then he started drinking again and I had to let him go a second time. I have no idea how he's doing now, but I often wonder. He was a great machinist and a nice guy when he was sober. This lady was using the company FedEx to deliver purses for her Etsy job. We had an employee who had been fired and it was one of those really contentious firings and he was physically removed from the building. After he was fired, he used the company FedEx to deliver his eBay sales. The company brought charges against him. It wasn't 1 or 2 sales here and there. He had a whole huge operation and was shipping out more than 20 shipments a week. I guess he thought it was too big a corporation for anyone to be reviewing the FedEx bills. Which was true until one of the big executives hired on a family member and we had to find something for them to do. I worked for a boutique hotel. You know, small, cute, expensive as frick. I was an ops manager. Basically, unless the area manager had to come in, I was the law. I got a frantic call on my downtime from an employee claiming our overnight guy tried to attack him. I gave a sigh, as the guy freaking out is notorious for being a drama queen. I load up the security camera on my home PC, go to the time frame, and holy crap, our night guy legitimately lunged at his coworker and tried to strangle him. Luckily, a desk was between them, and that gave the victim time to bolt. Instantly, I felt like a jerk for doubting him. Well, this is when I call the area manager. We show up at the butt crack of dawn and speak with the guy who made the attack, and he claims he didn't do it. We show him the video, and I crap you not, he responds with, "I don't recall the events of that evening." We fired him on the spot. What started the fight, you ask? Well, the victim had done extra work to make the attacker's shift easier. The attacker felt like this was an insult to his work ethic. Oh, and I got multiple reference requests from him from similar hotels asking for a good reference. I simply said I wasn't able to provide a positive reference, as legally that was all I could say. Years ago, like in the 90s, my husband worked for a small company. He did a little bit of everything, and one of his jobs, along with a coworker, was keeping all the computers running. Now, this was a sales-based company, so all of the salespeople had laptops for themselves. If there was an issue or problem, they'd bring them in to be looked at. So one day, one of the non-local sales guys was in for a meeting. He said, "Hey, my computer is running really slowly. Can you take a look at it?" My husband says, "Yeah, sure, no problem." Sales guy leaves the computer and goes to whatever meeting he was off to. My husband and his colleague take a look and see that the hard drive is nearly full and figured that was slowing things down. They dig deeper and see the computer is filled with adult movies. Like, filled with it. Material of all sorts. Nothing illegal per se, but very close to it. Now, mind you, the salespeople have signed an agreement that their assigned computer was for business use only, not personal use. So we have a slight problem here. My husband and his colleague, not wanting to make a mountain out of a molehill, and not wanting the guy to lose his job over a fixable problem, just wiped the drive clean, reformatted it, got things set up again, and the computer was working great. The guy comes back the next day and my husband goes, "Hey, Mr. Sales Guy, we took a look at your computer. It was running slowly because the disk was nearly full with personal files, so we wiped it clean, reformatted things, and you're good to go. You know, just a reminder that our company-issued computers are for business use only. If you're looking for something for personal use, here are some relatively inexpensive laptops with a lot of storage space. You can put whatever you want on them. Small investment for privacy, you know?" And with that, they gave him a printout list of some good, reasonably priced laptops he could purchase for himself. The sales guy just kind of mumbled something, grabbed his computer, and was on his way without so much as a thank you. Well, the guys figured that was that, but guess who was back 6 weeks later with a not working at all computer? Yep, same idiot. Problem? Yep, computer was filled again with adult movies. They were done at this point. The two of them went straight to the president's office, showed her what was on the computer, well enough to give her an idea, and explained what had happened previously. She was a very no-nonsense lady, so needless to say, by 3 p.m. that afternoon, that sales guy was no longer employed. What an idiot. Oh boy, they really gave this guy every warning they could give him without directly telling him, "Don't have videos of people doing the nasty on your work computer," and he still didn't get it, or didn't care enough to stop. Stupid either way, my dude. About a year ago, I hired a guy who was down on his luck. Went against my best judgment. Due to the nature of my business, I usually don't hire people that fit his profile. He was out of shape, poor hygiene and stuff, and it wasn't long before I started hearing complaints from female employees and clients. Turns out he'd often attempt to flirt with women, and when turned down, he'd lose his mind and call them terrible names and insults. I don't tolerate that crap, so I gave him a very stern warning. The very next day, I found one of my sweetest female employees visibly upset. Upon inquiring, she said that this idiot had followed her home yesterday to make sure she got home safely. Then he showed up in the morning to escort her to the office. She was genuinely scared. I called him into my office and told him to scram. He threatened to file a complaint with the Department of Labor for discrimination against men who have an innate need to protect women. It didn't matter. I told him to beat it, and now I'm fighting the stupidest claim ever with the Department of Labor. I used to do some consulting work and hired a woman to help out. Mostly clerical stuff and whatnot. I flew down to St. Thomas for a meeting and got a call from Sonatrol at 10:30 p.m. She had keys to my building but didn't know about the alarm. Basically, she and her boyfriend brought another couple down to have a menage a four in one of my offices that I'd converted to a bedroom where I could crash if I worked late. So I called her. She answered mid-deed and acted normal, albeit a little tipsy. I talked about a few mundane details I needed to relay to her anyways, and then mentioned to make sure she was only ever at the office between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., since there was a silent alarm that would call me with audio activities in the building. When I got back to town, her keys were sitting on my desk. I fired a guy because he said he couldn't come to work because it was raining and he'd just washed his car the day before. Had a guy on location fake an injury. Now, mind you, he did injure himself severely, accidentally, but that wasn't his plan. His plan had been to fake a minor injury and get put on workers' comp. The problem was he screwed up how to do it and ended up hurting himself way worse. You ask, how did he know he was trying to fake injure himself? Well, that's very easy to explain. We had a 20-minute tape of him hiding behind one of the trucks on the worksite practicing his fall. Then a written confession from friends saying he'd been planning it since the day we hired him. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Not my business, but my dad's. He hired predominantly people with criminal records, and literally all they had to do was inspect rental cars for damage as the cars left the lot and keep their noses clean. You could do pretty much anything you wanted on your downtime with no complaints from my dad as long as he didn't get any complaints from the owners of the car lot. One day, one of the supervisors from the lot I worked for walks out and asks me for my dad's number. The supervisor had caught a guy stealing gas from the property. He even had security camera footage of it happening. The guy was instantly fired. It didn't stop him from trying to give other people with troubled backgrounds a second chance, though. One of my dad's best friends of 30-plus years and his brother were both ex-cons and struggled to get jobs. Plus, with the exception of this guy, they were all super reliable and gave him no problems. Everyone with no record, me probably being the only exception, gave my dad a ton of problems and weren't as reliable. He and his ex-cons worked well until the business went under many years later. At a previous job, we had issues with food being stolen from the break room fridge. The company made a big stink about it, and it kept happening, so they very obviously installed security cameras in the break room. Like big frickin' cameras in plain sight pointing at the fridge, with our bosses being very direct about it. There is the camera. You really want to lose your job over eating someone's sandwich? A few days later, my guy gets fired for stealing food again. Literally on camera, just grabbing people's lunch out of the fridge and eating it then and there. I work on employee claims and lawsuits. I've told this story on here before. A guy filed a discrimination complaint against the company after he got fired for stealing hot dogs from the refrigerator. This warehouse, big company, this wasn't at my location, they kept a stock of hot dogs for employee appreciation picnics, usually weekly cookouts. Nobody knew why they were disappearing, so announcements were made and all employees were asked to not eat the hot dogs, and if they wanted some they could ask, but couldn't have several packs. That didn't work, so warnings were announced. Finally, a camera was installed near the fridge and he got caught red-handed. He was practically inhaling the hot dogs directly from the fridge by the packet. After he was fired, he filed a discrimination claim on the basis of disability due to his weight. I sent the response with a video of him eating the hot dogs. Also, he couldn't prove his weight was a disability under the ADA, and weight is not a protected class. We won that claim. My dad owned his own business working as a color corrector and editor. He had this one employee who'd been there since day one and ended up being similar to an assistant manager. My dad owned that company for more than 10 years, and just recently, he had to fire that assistant manager guy because apparently he was telling employees and customers that my dad hates gays, people who aren't white, his kids, his whole family, and that he's just a terrible person. Basically driving all business away, pushing my dad's company towards bankruptcy. Turns out, this employee was basically just a narcissistic sociopath. My dad was just sad his employees never trusted him enough to tell him about what this guy would say to them. A guy threw a hammer at another guy for changing the radio station. Look, we've all wanted to do this kind of thing before, right? When someone changes the radio, or leaves the door open, or keeps sniffing too loudly, right? You just can't act on those intrusive voices, folks. Wait, we all have those urges though, right? My employee had a corporate card, charged a vacation, purse, fossil watch, takeout, and she was racking up all this evidence along with actually just being miserable to work with. She had a laptop, quote, stolen within weeks of joining our company. I fired her, and a few days later, a watch catalogue from Fossil showed up at the office with her name on it. We have an active court case for all the theft. The one that instantly leaps to mind was the woman who was fired day 2 of a call center training course because she just wouldn't stop having a good time with herself, if you know what I mean. It was really somewhat sad. She was late 30s or early 40s, and I don't think this was an employment scam or anything like that, and more likely just a mental compulsion or substance use. It was not subtle, but done under a shawl or scarf thing draped over her lap. She was politely and quietly asked to stop by the trainer, and then stopped momentarily but started up again 15 to 20 minutes later. I am not sure how she got through HR screening. This was for a wireless phone company too, not a chat line or anything. Back when I had my translation business, I hired a guy to seek out contracts for me, and I'd pay him 20% finder's fee. Instead of sending the finished project to a client, he accidentally sent undressed pictures of himself, and I learned of it when my client forwarded me the mail half an hour later, including the multiple glorious shots of his trouser snake. I don't even. I had a subcontractor on a job for my company trying to convince the client that they should dump me and go with their business and that they'd undercut me by 10%. I learned this from the client, who asked me to find another person to service our contract. I knew somebody who had to take a substance test, so he bought a little sample jar of clean urine with him, went into the toilet, came out, gave the fake sample to whoever was doing the test, and got fired on the spot. The sample was ice cold. Fresh number 1 is hot. My wife's cousin worked with me and her father at our work, landscaping, for a couple of months. He had previous experience and we needed the help, so we hired him despite warnings to the owner from my father-in-law that he was a complete jerk. To name a few things, we were putting fresh mulch in one of the industrial parks that we maintained, and he had me close the doors to the bed of the truck, after which he raised the bed so that all the mulch would slide to the back. Except the doors weren't designed for that kind of load and immediately sprang open. If they hadn't hit the ground while springing open, they would have royally screwed up the cars on either side of us. He then proceeded to call the owner of the company and tell him what happened, placing all the blame on me for, quote, not closing the doors right. We took him on a paver job and he insisted that he could cut pavers with our wet saw. Except he didn't use gloves, so the material from the pavers being cut, which includes some nasty stuff, absolutely destroyed the skin on his hands, and he called out for the next 2 days because he couldn't move his fingers. That was not the first time he had made that mistake. On the same paver job, which called for a Belgian block to be installed along the driveway, he decided it would be a great idea to mix the mortar and the sand for the base on the owner's freshly paved driveway and use it as he needed it. Except it rained the day he did this, and he ended up with a 3/4-ton block of what was essentially concrete in the middle of their, again, freshly paved driveway. On multiple occasions, we got reports from the grass-cutting crew that he went out with that he did nothing all day except sit in the truck, text his wife, and smoke. He thought he could get away with this because neither myself nor my father-in-law were with him. Eventually, he was fired, and we got a couple of extremely nasty but entertaining phone calls from his wife, calling all of us some choice names while vowing that we were no longer part of his family. My dad and I ran a business together cleaning out foreclosed homes for a real estate agency as I was finishing high school. I was a senior, so I got out at lunchtime, and we could usually get a house done in half a day. Sometimes we'd get some real bad ones, and we had a few guys would call in to see if they wanted to make a quick $100 for a day's work. On my literal last day of class, my dad picked up one of our usual guys and got the house done about 90% by lunch. He was a pretty normal guy that we never had any trouble with. The guy we paid to help my dad went out to his truck and came back into that house with a 9mm and robbed my dad at weapon point of his wallet and took his keys and left in our truck. The funny thing is, my dad only had the cash he was about to give him an hour later for finishing up the house. The state police got the guy's number from us, and they told him some bogus story about how my dad was being investigated for not paying his workers, and if he met the police with the truck, they'd get his statement and let him go. The idiot pulls up and gets arrested on the spot. He got 8 years in prison. That has to be a contender for dumbest criminal, right? If you steal a car and get a call from the popo saying, "Hello, can you bring that exact truck you happen to have to us for an unrelated matter?" you should be abandoning it or fleeing the state. We had a young IT intern helping us with some hardware inventory tasks. It wasn't uncommon for laptops not to make it back to us, as projects would hoard them from terminated employees. But one day, we noticed his backpack open and a laptop of a model we used sticking out. Sent him to the other side of the building and checked the serial number, and yep, it was one he reported as missing during a recent inventory. Opportunistic theft is one thing, but bringing it back into the office every day? Just, wow. There was this one guy at my work, extremely nerdy, and this is from a self-admitting nerd, but this guy was absolutely obsessed with Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Literally the only things he would ever talk about, and would talk about them for as long as you'd let him. One day, I was on register, and I saw him being dragged out of the store by cops in handcuffs. Turns out he'd been shoplifting tons of playing cards of those above-listed games, at least $500 worth, as our store policy was to let an employee get away with it up to that amount before busting them. I think because the charges stick harder or something. Not me, but my dad. His worker asked if he wanted to assist in making crystal. He no longer works for my dad. Also, him and his girlfriend got busted for making said crystal and are serving 5 years. My actual name is Skylar, but that doesn't mean that this is a Breaking Bad reference. Committing no notable offense, but faking incompetence or causing inconvenience in order to be fired and receive severance pay. Yes, I'm familiar with Better Call Saul and I love it, but as it turns out, and hold on to your seats for this, that being a jerk for money is not exclusive to that show. A new heavy mechanic was hired, claimed to have prior experience. He was hired because he had a kid on the way and was in a bad spot financially, and the owners had a soft spot for unlucky people. Within a week, his nickname was Almost. He almost did the work correctly. He almost rewired an electrical system. He almost rebuilt an air dryer successfully. He almost mounted tires. The probability of the part he rebuilt failing within a week was a solid 60%. By the end of week 2, it was clear most of his knowledge was book-learned and not real-world. They wouldn't let him do anything except change oil. Once his probation period was up and he showed no improvement or drive, they let him go. Trucks only make money when they move, and he could not keep them moving. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.